So let me ask you a question. Why do you think we're seeing the a rapid increase in the past few years
I can explain that as well.
of young people identifying as trans?
What's that signify?
The history of left-handedness.
This is the history of left-handedness in the United States. Do you see what happens here?
It levels out. It goes up and levels out.
Levels.
We used to treat people who were left-handed as satanic, as the devil, all that kind of shit. You remember that, right? And that's why there was a lot of people who didn't record themselves as being left-handed, and then boom, when we stopped doing that after the 1880s and in the 1900s, it spiked. Now this spike isn't because there was a whole bunch of indoctrination or Alex Jones was like, oh, left-handed ideology, everyone has become left-handed. This has nothing to do with that. This is naturally how many left-handed people there were, and then it plateaued. We are in a situation right now where it is safer than ever for people to come out, and if they're queer, bisexual, whatever it is, and because of that, they feel safer expressing that. That's why Gen Z of all
I was concerned there was a trans genocide.
Yeah, so here's...
This is the actual statistics on people increasing. You can see the red one. That is Gen Z. That is the amount of people who in Gen Z, it's skyrocketing. It looks like they're identifying more than ever because their generation feels more comfortable talking about this kind of stuff.
So you don't think that there's like a trans genocide or anything like that?
I don't think that there's a trans indoctrination that is coming through media.
Genocide, I said it.
Yes, and I'm saying that I don't think there's a trans indoctrination coming through media that is programming kids to become trans. I think that's ridiculous.
Donchi, bonsoir, and hey fam, it's your friendly neighborhood Lance here to give you a quick update. I'm about to head out to the Tim Pool compound. I'm currently staying in the travel lodge that they put me up in, and some people might be wondering what exactly is my goal here. If I'm being honest with myself, I know it would be the greatest thing ever if, I just sat across from him and said, you're a goddamn Nazi fascist, and then ripped off his beanie, and then, oh, massive victory for the left. But that's not actually what I'm going to be doing. To me, it's actually way more important, and what I want to try and do here is if I can just make like 1% of his audience less paranoid and afraid of queer people, the way that I think there's this like echo chamber of indoctrination that they kind of they keep hearing the same things over and over and over. 70 to 85% of people who are trans end up regretting it and want to detransition. Made up statistics like that when they say it enough times, it feels real to all of them and justifies a lot of the bigotry that they actually try to push forward. If I can kind of dismantle some of that, if I can have a handful of people even want to go online for 2 seconds and look up the Cornell University meta-study that shows that it's less than 5%. 55 of the studies that they looked at, 52 of them said that there is a net benefit to gender-affirming care and that there's a very low rate of detransition. And of the 3 that didn't say that, they were neutral. There was no negative effects to come from gender-affirming care. The science and the facts and the figures and the stuff of this is overwhelming. So if just a little bit of that can break through and I can get a handful of the people who normally would be very, very afraid and or wanting to pass legislation towards trans folk to double think that, change their minds, or even want to start looking this stuff up more, that would be a victory. So this is me recording this before anything happens. If I walk out of there and it's an absolute and utter disaster, I guess I failed. If I can achieve a little bit of that, then I guess it was a victory. Either way, this is me going into enemy territory. Yes, it's a little bit nerve-wracking to be on the compound with just myself. There's no one else coming with me. This is just me, but I don't know. It's a fight worth fighting, I think, and I hope I can make you all proud.
So we got some protests in New York City. After a homeless man named Jordan nearly died, he was put in a chokehold. The man, 3 people were trying to subdue him, and then in the effort to subdue him, the guy died. It was ruled a homicide, and now you have protesters calling for charges of this Marine. And things are starting to get a little hectic. Police are calling for help as things kind of heat up. But we're going to get into the nuances of that discussion, so I'll save a little bit. We do have news out of Russia. They're blaming the U.S. for the assassination attempt, so they claim. And we've got some news. Barstool Sports fired one of their hosts for rapping lyrics that contained an offensive word. I don't necessarily think it's fair to call what he said a slur because he wasn't calling anybody the word, but, he said the word, and then Penn Entertainment was like, you're fired, and now Dave Portnoy is like, I don't know, there's nothing I can do, I sold the company. So we'll get into that, plus a whole bunch of other stories, and we'll talk about the news. Banks collapsing. We got Paul Stanley, the the frontman for Kiss, is kind of walking back his statement on transgender kids, and a lot to talk about. Before we get started, my friends, today's episode is brought to you by Cast Brew Coffee. Take a look at this bag right here. This is Cast Brew Coffee over at castbrew.com. And you can get your bag of Rise with Roberto Jr. and Appalachian Nights today by going to castbrew.com. And with every purchase of Rise with Roberto Jr., you will get a picture of Roberto Jr. See, he's right there on the back. He's our rooster. He's very cool, and the coffee smells really good. So if you want to support the show and support our work, go to castbrew.com. But also, don't forget to head over to timcast.com. Click that Join Us button to become a member. As a member, you'll get access to the Members Only Uncensored show, which we will have up for you tonight at about 10 p.m., which will be fun because members actually get an opportunity to submit questions and actually call into the show. So if you would like to do that, become a member at least the $25 level. If you've been a member for at least 6 months, you will be granted access to submitting these questions, a screening process that we have. So don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Joining us tonight to talk about this and so much more is Lance from the Serfs.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm tripping balls being in this room right now. It feels like I took evil acid or something because I've been watching this show so much. Yeah, just like everything is here. It's wild. It's
bigger than it looks like, right?
It's bigger than it looks like, and when you're actually sitting in the room, there's a lot more props than you ever give this place credit for. I thought there was just like some samurai swords and like the occasional gun or something, but there's like
that's a real Civil War rifle.
There's a real Civil War musket in the.
That's right, rifled musket.
Yeah,
yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
so
like,
Union Civil War. It was never used.
It's like a museum here.
Very cool. Yeah, very cool stuff. So what do you do? Who are you?
I am a leftist commentator. I do politics, comedy from a dumpster fire perspective, and I have opinions, and sometimes people like to hear those opinions, and then they tune in to listen to them.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah. All right, well, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we have a lot of opinions to go through. Yeah. We also got the exact inversion of Lance, Seamus Coughlin.
That's how they describe me on the streets. My name is
Anti-Lance?
Yeah, exactly. I thought, no, they call him the anti-Seamus, I thought. But my name's Seamus Coughlin. I make cartoons. We call them
British.
Freedom Tunes. And he's British? Is that why you always got to take it to an ethnic place with me, man? Always ripping on me for being Irish. I was born here, but I make cartoons. I have a YouTube channel called Freedom Tunes. I'm also a podcaster. We uploaded a cartoon today, by the way. Y'all might want to check that one out. And I also have a stream on Rumble called Shamer. If y'all want to take a peek at that as well.
Now we have Moon Lord himself.
I am the Moon Lord.
He knows.
No longer Weed Lord. I have evolved. I have become
He knows.
one with the essence of the vibration and the fabric of reality. So good to see you, Lance.
So good to be here.
And if you don't know, you don't know. But I am the Moon Lord. Let's get hot.
And I am Serfs.com as always, guys. Let's get to it.
Let's jump into this first. Wait,
Actually,
pressing the wrong button over
this
here.
is I gotta flag this. This is the first time Ian and I have done a show together in almost a year.
Since we screamed about, I was yelling at you about religion or something.
Exactly.
Oh, and
This is
alcohol,
our
I
first
think, too.
show. Yeah, this is our first
Welcome
show
back,
back.
Seamus.
Yeah,
Great
it's
to
good
be here, man.
man.
Yeah, I've evolved on my stance on religion.
What
We've
happened?
also talked off air. We've talked off air a good bit, but it's just funny that it's like I just realized this is our first episode we're both doing together because I've been seeing you for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, we went last time we talked. We were talking about like I brought up vice. I was talking about alcohol. It's your vice or whatever. I said I think that was the real point of contention, and everyone's like, Ian, you're such a dick. I was like, I was just talking to Seamus. Like, we were just talking. Like
Yeah,
we were
but bro,
talking.
he's Irish. You can't say that.
But we were talking about.
That's racist.
I don't remember exactly what it was, but I don't really care. Do you?
No, yeah,
what
well,
was it?
I was just, it was a discussion about alcohol because I was saying that alcohol is not inherently sinful. Like Christ turned water into wine. It was his first public miracle.
I've gone
His
through.
blood was made of wine, right?
Well,
gone
no,
through-
with transubstantiation, the properties of bread and wine remain, but it actually becomes his flesh and blood.
I've had
that
like
you eat
serious problems with alcohol personally, which is probably why I was projecting issues. What were you saying?
Oh, I was just asking, like, when you actually eat the blood of Christ, is that Christ is inside you? And then,
Yeah.
but like his blood is alcoholic. Is that why it's wine?
So the properties of bread and wine remain, but what we believe as Catholics is that it's his literal flesh and blood.
Okay.
By his body, blood, soul, and divinity.
Interesting.
But he's not made of bread and wine.
No, he's not literally made of bread and
And
wine. No.
get crunk.
All right, let's read the news. Here we go.
Wait,
got
we
this
also have Serge Dupre. I
Serge,
didn't mention.
he already did say what's up. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Man, Moonlord.
Thanks, Doc.
All right, here's the story. We got this ABC 7 New York police issue call for help. Outrage continues to grow over deadly subway chokehold encounter. So the death of a subway rider who was put into a chokehold by a former Marine on the train has been ruled a homicide, and now activists are calling for charges to be filed. They have planned several protests and rallies on Thursday as the NYPD has issued a call for public help in their investigation. Jordan Neely, 30, died from a compression of the neck, the city's medical examiner determined Wednesday. Neely is recognizable to some New Yorkers as a Michael Jackson impersonator who regularly danced in the Times Square Transit Hub. On Monday afternoon, he was yelling and pacing back and forth on an F train in Manhattan. Witnesses and police said when he was restrained by at least 3 people, including a U.S. Marine veteran who pulled one arm tightly around his neck. A physical struggle ensued, leading to Neely losing consciousness. He was rushed to Lenox Hill Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. On Wednesday, a medical examiner determined Neely's his death was a homicide. However, that does not mean the case will be prosecuted as a homicide. Okay, that's the stupidest bit of writing I've ever heard. As a murder, they mean. Homicide means death caused by person. It doesn't mean criminal. So what they're trying to say is, though the death was ruled a homicide, it does not mean the case will be prosecuted as a murder. That is up to the Manhattan DA's office, which is investigating. But I suppose I'm probably being a little bit too harsh because you can, they're not being clear here. You can make the argument there's reckless homicide, there's negligent homicide. And so what they're saying is it's not clear that he will be criminally charged. They probably just should have said. They're going to say, as a part of our rigorous ongoing investigation, we'll review the medical examiner's report, assess all available video and photo footage, identify and interview as many witnesses as possible, and obtain additional medical records, read a statement from a spokesperson for the DA. So we've got video coming out of New York. Protesters, I believe this was yesterday, were seen in the streets, and the police made some arrests. And we'll get into it in a little bit, but one of our reporters, Elad Eliyahu, was physically assaulted by one of the protesters and had his property destroyed while he was in the process of doing journalism. But let's just get down to brass tacks here, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of arguments about this one. This is the story of a guy who was having a mental breakdown. I guess the news that recently came out was that he was a subway performer and his mental health collapsed after his, I think his mom was killed, is what they're reporting. And after that, he kind of just lost it. And then he had been arrested 40 times. He had once punched a 67-year-old woman in the face. And so as he was belligerent and on the subway, reportedly threatening people, saying that he would take it, he was ready to die and he would hurt people. This is when the three men subdued him. Reportedly, the Marine told everyone to call 911 and get the police down there. And then he ended up dying, which has resulted in the left, like AOC, whether or not people were, I don't know if you consider her left, but AOC.
Yeah, she's progressive.
She said this was a public murder. And now you've got protesters calling for this guy to be arrested. They're saying he committed a murder. And I think this is actually a really good example of what is described as anarcho-tyranny, in that you had 25 people pushed onto subway tracks in the past year. You've had like a woman get raped on a train in Philadelphia. And we don't hear a single peep from any of these politicians, from any of these activists, until someone actually stops the guy. If you go back 7 years...
Kills him, right? Kills him. He killed him.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when someone is being violent and then someone else acts in self-defense of others and the person dies in the process, now there's all of a sudden calls for, okay, so this guy should be criminally charged, but there was no call for stopping the 25 people being pushed onto subway tracks. That's an ongoing and acceptable thing, I suppose.
I'm never going to sit here and try and defend people pushing people on the subway tracks. That's a crime. Like, that's terrible.
Attempted murder.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if they die. So that's horrible. No one's going to be on the other side of that argument. But in terms of like the guy who just got killed, isn't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, doesn't, in self-defense, the proportionality of what you're doing has to be in response to the actual aggressive actions of the person, right? It has to be proportional. Is that correct? So you feel in your mind that it was a proportional response for him to choke him out to death in that situation because he was going to become such a threat to the person who choked him out.
But you made a big leap right there.
What's the leap?
You're ascribing intent to the Marine to kill.
Oh, I'm not saying he intended to kill him. I never said that, but he did end up killing him, right?
That's immaterial.
What has to be material, Tim, has to be, is he doing what he's doing?
Are you making a proportionality argument, or are you making
Yes, I'm asking you that because what he did proportional to the threat? Yes. So the threat that he was going to do.
It is proportional to subdue someone that is threatening other people and saying he'll die in the process.
And end up killing him, even if that was...
See, now you're doing it again. You're ascribing intent.
No, I'm not ascribing intent. I'm saying the results. This is what happened. The guy's dead. He's dead, right?
Results are immaterial to the proportionality of action.
So the proportionality of action in your mind was justified to what he was doing, his actual actions.
He held the guy on the ground while he said call 911.
And killed him. And choked him until he died.
You're doing it again.
No, you keep saying I'm doing it again. I'm saying this is the end results. I'm not saying this is what he meant to do. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. I don't know what's in his heart. Neither do you. None of us know what he meant to do that day when he woke up.
Absolutely. If someone is threatening other people, you are allowed to subdue them.
And then would it be like an involuntary manslaughter?
So
No, but this is what happened. It's to the point of death. So you have.
It's not a criminal.
It's not. I'm not saying he intended to kill him. That's the difference, right? But if he ended up dying as a result of that, was that proportional?
Yes.
He needed to be killed.
No.
Or he could have killed someone else.
Hold on. Stop that. You can't. You keep trying to say needed to be. No.
But that's what happened.
The Marine.
That's the end result.
You're saying the Marine tried to kill him.
No, I didn't say that.
Then why-
you
why
are
would-
saying
then
that I'm
why
saying
would
that.
you
You're putting
say-
words in my mouth. I'm saying that's what
Hold
ended
on,
up happening.
Let me respond. Then why would you say
they-
needed to be killed?
Because
why did you
what
say
he
needed
did to
be
him,
killed?
his chokeout ended up with the guy dying. So that was the
right.
end result. So his proportional response to what he thought was a threat was that I'm going to choke him out. I'm not trying to kill him, but I'm going to choke him out. Whether or not he dies is going to be something that we're just going to remain to be on the cards, right? This is chance. We'll leave it up to chance here.
So you are making a huge leap right there.
There's no leap, Tim.
Yeah,
what he's doing is that proportional. Is choking someone with the possibility of death. With the possibility of death.
Yes,
okay, so
absolutely.
So that's
I'll
just
tell you
stance.
this. Let me tell you. So if someone tried illegally entering my home,
Sure.
I will use whatever force necessary to stop them from illegally entering my home and illegally entering my home, right? I have the legal justification in the state that I live in to use whatever force necessary to stop someone from entering my home illegally. Now, you can't invite someone in, and there's actually some legal barriers here. Like, if someone actually walks up to your house and the door is open and they walk in, that's actually not an illegal entry. It is to a certain degree, but it's like trespass.
Sure.
It's like your door was open, there was no obstruction, and then you'll make an argument about entering the domicile could be considered fourth-degree burglary, depending on which state you're in. If they actually open the door and enter, they've now committed felony burglary. And you are entitled in West Virginia to use whatever force necessary to stop someone from illegally entering your house. That doesn't mean you just intend to actually kill someone. So in terms of we're out in the street, someone is threatening someone else. You are legally entitled to subdue them. Now,
even if that even in the act of doing that, you could kill them.
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Because where you're going with it is like, what act of subduing would be permitted in your mind then? Like holding his hands tightly?
One that doesn't have a possibility of death, I would say. Because
give me one. Give me one in your martial arts expertise.
Zero. Absolutely zero.
Okay, so
zero.
there's a
and I
problem.
think I can contend that no one here has any, right?
Well,
sorry, am I in a judo
I've just
room?
watched a lot of movies.
No, but
Sharp elbows.
But no, none of us have black belts. We don't know this shit. We're just a bunch of people who talk on the internet,
but now
right?
going black belts. I mean, I have hostile environment training, and I have some minimal martial arts training. Minimal. I've done some kung fu, taekwondo.
So once again, there's no experts here to talk about this. Yeah.
So certainly will contend I am not an expert. However, if someone is threatening harm against another person and 3 people find it reasonable to subdue him and the person dies, that person was in the process of committing a crime. If you lose your life in the process of committing a crime, I'm not going to blame the victims for this, right? Would you blame the victims for this?
When you're saying victims, you mean the people who killed him?
The people who are being attacked.
But were they attacked prior, or did they try to subdue him?
So-
do we have footage before the event
I don't
begins?
So in New York,
Yeah.
for example, if you go up to someone and threaten them, you've committed a crime, right? You've committed a criminal act of violence against another person by threatening them and going up to their face, right?
And so you're saying at that point you have the ability to proportionally respond with violence.
Actually, there's a video of this. Myth Informed has it. 7 years ago, this man was called a hero for diffusing violence by putting another man in a chokehold. A man in the subway was getting up in people's faces, and he was threatening them, and another man got up behind him and put him in a chokehold, and he was put on national television, and he was celebrated as a hero for doing so. So this is what I'm talking about, anarcho-tyranny. I feel like you're latching onto this completely from a point of you don't have knowledge on proper technique for subduing an individual,
None of us do.
nor the legal expertise.
None of us do as well.
But see that's kind of an absurd thing to just outright. Well, look, I'm going to say this guy committed a murder and should go to prison, but I'm not an expert and neither are you, therefore he should be convicted.
I never said that. I'm actually asking questions because these are things that I don't fully understand about. Is it legal for him to do what he did?
Yes. That's why he
it is
wasn't
proportionally legal.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why he wasn't charged. He was released. However, in this day and age, what's likely going to happen is anarcho-tyranny. People go out in the streets, they protest, and the police say, for political reasons, we're going to go find this guy and we're going to arrest him.
But I don't know. It depends. Unfortunately, we don't have footage of what happened before the chokehold.
That's what I'd like to know.
But
Yeah.
if there's enough people on the train that are witness to what was happening, and they're like, "Yo, he was threatening all of us," then I think the cops are not going to mess with that guy.
And that's what was reported. And there were 3 men trying to subdue him as he fought back. So there's no debate that this guy was acting violently and threatening people, and even said he was prepared to die. At that point, you have what could be a terroristic threat. I think if a guy got on a train and screamed, "I'm going to cause harm to people," and then said he was willing to die, you'd probably want to stop him because there's signs all over the subway saying, if you see something, say something. And I suppose we could go the route of when Luke Rutkowski had that video, there was a guy in a subway with a knife stabbing people, and the cop said, "We're not going to get involved at all." And then some guy had to try and intervene himself. It's funny, that guy's a hero.
Yeah, that was, I think, oh yeah, here it is. Matt Walsh retweeted Alexandria Cortez's tweet from 6 hours ago and asking specifically, what are they supposed to do? What are people supposed to do in this situation? Are they just supposed to sit there? If someone's screaming, they're gonna hurt somebody. You just sit there and wait until they actually hurts the person and then you respond?
And I'm just curious, honest question. We have the story from the Daily Mail from October. 25 victims have been shoved in front of subway cars so far this year. 2 victims were killed. Where was the protest?
Well, where was the video footage of it?
There is video footage of it.
Is it public?
Yes.
Public video footage?
And I can't play it on YouTube, but there's video footage of people being pushed in front of trains. And where's AOC? Where's any of these protesters? Nowhere to be found. Anarcho-tyranny is that when the criminals do it, as explained in, Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag Archipelago, when a criminal does this act in the Soviet Union, that's just a criminal. That's what they do. But when you, the citizen, defend yourself, you knew better.
But so you're blaming AOC for not bringing attention to this specifically? So as
Blaming?
in, or you're saying that
criticizing.
she's hypocritical because she doesn't talk about the people being pushed in front of trains, but she's talking about this now? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying hypocritical. No, I'm saying I have a question of why now? Why only when people are victimized and they defend themselves are we now upset about what happened on the subway?
Keep saying victimized. We're talking about a poor homeless person who
attacks people.
may have been having an episode and died in what ended up being the struggle. So why are the people who were subduing him victims? What makes them victims of this?
He assaulted them.
So you have that on camera that he assaulted them first.
According to all the news reports and the police and the witness statements.
Can we see the footage? I want to see. I haven't seen that yet.
I think we can show the choke out.
Okay, so according to the news reports, the witnesses and the police, he went and threatened violence against people, which is assault. And
right, but you're saying he specifically threatened violence against the people who subdued him. Do we have evidence of that? It's one thing for him to be in a train being like, I'm upset.
You're not winning an argument here.
I'm not trying to win an argument.
You're being
I'm
awfully
asking
pedantic.
Awfully pedantic.
Yes.
Why would you use pedantic in this form? As in, I'm trying to get to the root of this problem.
No. It's absurd to imply that if a guy walks up to a woman and says he's going to harm her, that another man can't protect her.
Right. And so this is why I'm asking: did he say to the people who subdued him, "I'm going to harm you.
Yes,
I'm going to hurt you"?
That's immaterial to a self-defense claim in proportionality.
Okay.
If this guy was threatening people, right? And then someone said, I'm going to stop you before you hurt someone. That is legal self-defense acting in the defense of others. That makes those people who are stopping the guy threatening people the victims of a violent individual who is trying to cause harm. Yeah, I just find it fascinating that there's an effort to defend the aggressor in this circumstance. Right?
Oh, so you're suggesting that the guys, even if the guys that were choking out weren't the ones being threatened, that they're still considered a victim because they stepped in to defend other people?
Well, I'm saying outright that if you're on a train and there's a guy, you're on a train, you can't get off that train. You are trapped.
Yeah,
right?
I used to live in this area, by the way. I used to live in Flatbush. I used to take these trains every single day. I have seen this. I have seen this and worse. I have seen people in the middle of episodes where I was like, this person could potentially either harm themselves or harm me. It never crossed my mind that I need to choke them out to the point of potential death in order to protect everyone else on the train. That never even entered my mind. So that's why I'm asking you, do you have specific footage of him threatening the very people who subdued and ended up killing him?
But why does that matter?
I don't think there is footage.
But like, what is it?
All right. Well, then that's all I want to know.
But what does
All
that
right.
have to do with what I said? That's why I understand your thought.
Because I would think that the proportionality being that you ended up killing them, even if that was not your intent, I understand that you don't think he intended to do that. Fine. But even if that was it, were they like threats to him in the immediate present? Were they on the verge of committing an act of violence towards him that required proportional violence that ended up in death?
But it's not a requirement someone threatens you for you to act in defense of others. Right? So your question is kind of in an unnecessary direction. And I'll elaborate. If you're on a train and you're trapped in a box and someone is threatening violence, then yeah, you're a victim.
So I've been a victim multiple times then. I was in these subways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the craziest thing to me.
But I don't feel like a victim. I've never been hurt. I never was hurt by people who were going through those kind of episodes.
Other people have been.
I'm not saying they haven't. I'm not saying this is a good thing.
25 people were pushed in front of trains.
Okay, so these 25 people who were pushed in front of trains, how is that directly related? Were these people also going through episodes? Were they also people who were homeless? Did they have mental illness?
I would say anybody shoving
here?
someone in front of a train at random is like going through an episode. You know what I mean? The correlation is that crime and murder on the subway has been increasing, or has at least been apparent in the press, but I don't see you caring about it at all until it's the aggressor who gets killed.
no one, I think, on the left is going to defend this stat that you're pulling.
Then
out
why
about
put a
people
guy
being
in
pushed
prison for finally saying stop killing people?
This is like, Tim, if I approached you today and I was like, hey, do you know what goes on in Rikers Island? Have any of you done a show on what happens in Rikers Island? How they hold people in Rikers Island? Do you know what?
We not Rikers Island specifically, but we talk about prison reform all the time.
Okay,
and how
do you know
screwed up
about
it
bail
is.
reform and the fact that people die in Rikers Island waiting to have their day in court because they
Yes.
can't afford it?
And we've talked about it.
And you've
But I
done
don't-
entire
but-
shows on that.
but
And
I
we've
don't-
talked about how people literally die in prison while they're waiting for that shit.
We talked
That's
about
terrible.
Okay, so we actually talked about one guy who got wrongly arrested, lost his job, was kicked out of his apartment, went to Rikers for 3 months, only to be released and then told, sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. The city owes him nothing because they considered the prosecution not to be malicious. But this is the problem, man. Like, we talk about stuff like this all the time.
But the example you just gave me was not me talking about the systemic problem of people who are poor being in Rikers
quite
Island
literally
before
what it
they
was.
before they get to trial. They die before they're not released. You just gave me a story of someone who was released
I'm
prior
giving
to
you an
that.
example of a specific show we've actually talked about someone wrongly held and had their life destroyed.
Okay.
Now, of course, we can go on further and say yes, people have died. Yes,
They
the
have.
system is corrupt. And my point is this: when we talk about stuff like this, like wow, in October we talked about 25 people being pushed in front of train cars. You guys just shit all over us and ignore these problems. Then finally, when three
No one
guys
is ignoring this. I told you, no one's on the other side of this. No one is pro push people onto trains.
Where's your protest? Where's your protest?
Where's my protest?
Yeah, where's your protest?
Where's your Rikers protest?
We had it on the show, but you don't watch
did a
the
protest?
show.
You did an actual protest. You guys stood up and then walked to the streets or
we
what?
don't go on the streets ever,
But
right?
I'm not blaming you for not talking about that, Tim, because this is the problem of like you are judging someone based on absence, based on your absence of caring about something. Why haven't you talked about this, Lance? The fact that you haven't talked about this means that you don't care about that.
That's not what I said.
Not true, though.
That's not what
but
I
that's
said.
the implication of what you were saying right now.
My implication is, instead of helping us deal with this when we talk about it, you make up garbage about us and then post nonsense on the internet.
When have I brought up garbage about people pushing people into trains? This is the most
I'm
random
not
example.
talking about you saying, I'm saying you don't talk about it, right? I'm not criticizing you for not talking about it. I'm saying finally, when there are people who are like, we've had 25 people pushed in front of trains, we've had 2 of them killed, I'm not going to let this person hurt somebody. It's y'all saying that person should go to prison. It's like, how is that solving the problem? You guys are making it worse. Your protests, your support for the criminals make this worse.
So our solution to this, if you're asking, when you're saying you mean the left, right? Our solution to a lot of this is that
You're speaking in support of the criminal, so I'm saying you.
Okay, so I am saying that the solution to a lot of this would be investing very heavily in things like healthcare, like getting and making sure that people have access to it and not cutting the restrictions, like allowing people to have access to healthcare, not as a requirement based on how much money they have, based on their income, but allowing them to get the care they need. That would have gone a long way to preventing a problem like this and future problems that are going to happen. I have no idea what's going on with the 25 people who've been pushed in front of trains. If it happens to be because people have mental illness, this is a tangible solution that we could work towards. This is something that are you against that idea about investing heavily into mental
I'm for
health care, public health care? Well, then there you go. That's a much better line.
So here's my
right?
issue. My issue is when this story came out in October, we talked about it. And we said, why is this happening? What are the solutions? What are the problems? When this story comes out now, you, completely ignorant of what's been going on in New York, side with the criminal. And so people like me are flabbergasted that we've been focused on the issue of crime, the issue of mental health, the entire time going back several years. And this is why I left New York, because 2 cops got murdered outside of my apartment. And then what do we hear? Protesters in the street defending the criminals.
You keep saying criminal. I have a problem with criminalizing people who are homeless or people who are poor or people who are mentally ill. And then suddenly
I'm not
determining
saying he's a criminal for being poor. I'm saying he's a criminal because he threatened people with harm. Like incitement to violence is a crime, just like AOC says, right?
I really want to see the start of this video footage. I want to see the moment where he was threatening the very people who tried to take him down.
Look, either you accept that the witnesses, the media, and the police say this is what happened, or we can agree no one has any idea, so there's no point in even talking about it.
I think the interesting maybe confluence is that you were mentioning preventative measures are a way to go about it. What do you think about defensive measures, like people should be armed and ready for this kind of thing regardless of the prevention methods?
I mean, when it comes to defensive measures and people should be armed, I'm going to probably be on the exact opposite as the rest of you, because you're probably very pro-gun here, right? I'm just making, we don't have the same problems in Canada that you do in the United States for mass shootings, for mass gun violence, for that kind of stuff.
You have 30 million people, don't you? Is it 30 million?
Okay, so by ratio of the population, Tim. So if you compare ratio of the population, Canadians to America, we don't have mass shootings like you do. No one else does. It's a uniquely American problem. The mass shooting thing is a uniquely American thing.
Obesity is pretty heavy here.
Well, it's I don't think it's fair to say uniquely American because there are mass shootings in many other countries.
Oh, there is, but it's a uniquely American problem that it's disproportionately happening here.
Well, mass killings aren't a uniquely American problem, but mass killings done with the use of firearms is much more uniquely American. I don't think anyone's going to debate that countries that have fewer firearms are going to have fewer people killing each other with firearms. It then becomes a moral
Australia
question
has
of whether
more
it's
per capita than the United States. Is that
more
right?
per capita.
That is not true. No
I just
country
looked
comes
up
close to the United States.
List of countries by no. Okay, I'm sorry. That was a mistake.
Sorry,
El
Australia.
Salvador,
And
Venezuela.
when you're correct,
Yeah, so,
when you're
is it all right if I
correcting
just finish my thought?
Sure.
Yeah.
And then I'll
So
list.
my basic point
Yeah, that was
is,
way off. The United States is not the most. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th.
El Salvador.
And so of all the other countries in that list, which of them are considered part of the G20? You have to compare countries that have similar economic systems, similar economic societal structures. The United States places number 1 when you compare them to any other G20 country.
Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
it's true that as far as developed nations go, the
Yes.
United States does have a much higher rate of gun violence. I don't deny that. My argument
More
is
guns.
simply that other nations do have higher rates, depending on the nation that you're looking at. There's still a pretty decently high homicide rate in a lot of developed countries, and there are a lot of mass killings. In the United States, those mass killings are generally carried out with firearms, but according to CDC studies, firearms are used to prevent more violent crimes each year than they're used to commit. So it's a much more complex argument than simply saying the U.S. has more firearm deaths, therefore restricting firearm ownership would prevent those.
Let me ask you too. Do you know what country has the most grenade attacks?
I only know the answer because I saw you type in it. I think it's Sweden, right?
I actually didn't type that in. I searched for.
By the way,
I
decently
would have no
high
idea.
murder rate was a very clumsy.
I don't want to cheat, but I saw you type in it. But yeah,
I did
so
not. I
didn't know that
didn't
until
type in Sweden. I
Okay.
typed in most grenade attacks by country, and Sweden is the only thing that comes up. Wow. And yeah, Sweden has more grenade attacks than any other country, but grenades are illegal there.
Okay.
I've got a feeling
Why are there grenade attacks
okay.
in Sweden?
So, yeah, I would love to answer this question. So, if we're going back to guns and the U.S. versus Canada, when I said that there's G20, if we look at all the G20 countries, the United States disproportionately by ratio of the population has way more gun deaths, way more gun violence, and a lot of that gun violence, by the way, is people killing themselves. Just so we're completely clear.
Yeah.
But if you look at it in the framework of Canada has a very different set of rules for firearms than the United States does. You can still have a firearm in Canada. You just have to take a 2-day course and you get a license and then you get gun training and then you have the ability to buy guns. And that way, everyone has a license. They know how to use firearms properly. They're not just going to be running around the streets, pointing them and then all that kind of shit. And you can also control for that.
But that's not what's happening in the United States. Like people just running around randomly. Like
No, I'm not saying that it is. But I'm saying that that is in my opinion, that is a better system. I'm not trying to take your guns away. Hell no. I think guns are fun. We all love shooting guns. I like having a second penis. I'm just saying that, like, at the end of the day, if you look at how it works with Canada, this could be applied to the United States federally. You could have a federal program where you have to have a 2-day gun training program. You tax the gun producers and the weapons manufacturers, and then you get them to pay for it so poor people could afford this program.
Right, but you can't do that because gun ownership is a constitutional right. Or I should say, gun ownership is a human right guaranteed, protected against
Second
government
Amendment.
infringement.
I'm all about training in schools. I think the public schools should have gun training for kids.
Like they used to.
They used to,
Absolutely,
yeah.
yeah. Gun clubs.
I would highly advocate for more training, but you're just suggesting that you can't force it on people.
The Constitution clearly, and according to the writings of the Founding Fathers and to, I think, Heller versus D.C., gun ownership is a human right, and the Constitution protects against government infringement of that right. That being said, we got the NFA, we got the updates to the NFA in the 80s, so certainly gun rights have been infringed to an absurd degree. You know what? Not to mention, back in the days when they codified the Constitution, people owned warships privately, and Halliburton, Northrop Grumman. Well, I shouldn't say Halliburton; they're a construction thing. But Northrop Grumman, Boeing, etc.
Lockheed.
These companies are private companies that build nuclear weapons. So we basically where we're at right now is that private corporations with no accountability can have the most powerful weapons of mass destruction in the world, but them and the government and it doesn't follow. Either the people have the power or they don't have the power, right? We've abdicated it to corrupt organizations.
And corporations are not people.
Right.
Let's be clear. This regarding this dude that choked the guy out, I think what's going to come up is was it adequate force or was it too much? And I feel like if he had punched the guy directly in the face, that would have been worse. Because although, if they got into a fist fight, because he could have fallen backward and hit his head. At least he was in control of the guy's body. It's really sad that the guy died, but I feel like this was like a very low level amount of force to apply to someone that was threatening to kill people or hurt people.
Why did 3 people find it necessary to
He
try
was
and
probably
stop this guy.
flailing and kicking and
But
screaming.
what-
Who knows?
So it is hard because you mentioned there's no footage prior, but something happened that resulted in 3 New York people who are likely not conservatives to decide this man must be subdued.
Yeah.
3 people. Yeah. So when it comes to the idea of proportionality, I'm like, if 3 New Yorkers of all people were like, this guy's got to be stopped, that's kind of crazy to me because, look, I'm a gun nut, right? My view is people have a right to defend themselves with a lot more force than people in New York do. But if people in New York felt they had to stop him, these people, I doubt these guys are conservative. There's like no conservatives live in New York. It's like 20% Republican, and if they are Republican, they're probably moderate right. Something must have happened. But I don't even need to sit here and say what could have or what must have. What we know, what we choose to believe based on what the police, the media, and the witnesses have said is that this guy was threatening people with violence and said he was prepared to lose his life over it. Three men then said this man must be subdued, and they subdued him. And then the guy died, which sucks. It's unfortunate.
Did he get a cause of death?
It was a compression of the neck. Yeah. Homicide.
So you've got a massive platform here. A lot of people watch you all the time. And so what you say, obviously, and advocate for is going to affect a lot of people's lives. If this is a problem that genuinely concerns you, why isn't it something that you would frame and want to advocate for more resources for mental health access and bring that up on a regular basis? And I'm not saying, and I'm sure, no, okay, hold on, Tim. I'm sure you've done it before. I'm sure you've had specials before. I'm what?
We do it a lot.
Okay. Why isn't that the focus? Why isn't today, hey, by the way, everybody, this horrifying tragedy happened on the New York subway. We got to talk about this.
Yeah.
Here's our angle. Our angle is we need to invest in mental health. We need to invest in giving access to public health care for Americans.
First of all, when it comes to the issue of violence in this country, conservatives have been screaming about mental health for decades.
Reagan is one of the ones that like gutted the institutions in America.
Reagan's one of the worst presidents this country's ever had. No fault divorce. How about that?
Yeah,
gun control.
Yeah.
I don't know why Republicans like that guy.
The reason that they like him is because of the way that he stood up to communism. But I totally agree that he had a lot of really bad policies, and I'm not a stan.
But conservatives have taken the stance of gun violence and mass shootings as an issue of mental health, and then the left takes the opposing.
But do they invest in that? Do they vote for it?
Well, of course not. The Republican Party's garbage.
When I look up the votes of the Republican Party, they're not voting for amendments that are actually going to like give people more access to mental health.
But that's where you have
an opportunity.
But you don't want to come onto a show where we say the Democratic and Republican Party should be dismantled and obliterated, and then make an argument that one side is bad. I'll sit here and be like, bro, if you want to have make a list of every single member of Congress who should be removed from office, I will put all of them but like 4.
One problem is that when people advocate for mental health, a lot of that advocation is more drugs, that this new drug will fix your brain. But I'm of the belief that less drugs allow you to fix your, like sometimes for very short periods of time, you might need something to help, but then you don't want people long term. I don't want them on crazy pharmaceuticals that make them go,
Right. Well, and we have to bring up often this medication actually increases suicidal ideation and aggressive thoughts and things like that. But I do want to answer your question. You said, why isn't that the subject of like the show today?
Or the premise or the framing of it.
Because when we do talk about this stuff on like a normal day, when news breaks of like 25 people pushed in front of trains, or a woman was raped on a train in Philadelphia, and we're sitting here saying like, what is going on in these cities? What are the failed policies that are resulting in this? We talk about it all the time. Today, we're talking about the fact that protesters went out in New York and physically assaulted one of our friends and reporter because he simply filmed them, and they are demanding criminal charges of the guy who tried to stop the violent offense. See, that is anarcho-tyranny. That when you have ongoing crime, when you have victimization, people being killed, and a woman being raped on a train, we talk for a year, 2 years, 3 years. When the riots happened in 2020, we had Michael Tracy's reporting showing all of the riots across the country and the mom and pop shops that were putting up signs saying, please don't hurt us. We talk about it nonstop. And then one day, someone on a train, 3 guys, say, we must stop this man. Maybe because they were like, we've seen too many people die on these train tracks before. And now we've got leftist protesters saying that guy should go to prison for it. And AOC calling it a public murder. I'm like, yo, AOC, I didn't see you call out the public murder in the subway trains. And again, maybe it's ignorance. But the problem I see is, this is why I refer to the left as NPCs or a cult. There is complete ignorance to the problem ongoing, and then a hyperpolarization in a single moment in the wrong direction, which makes the problem worse.
You know what's so wild is the other side feels the exact same
That's what
way
I'm talking
in the
Except
other
we're not
direction.
conservatives.
In the opposite direction.
Except
yeah.
we're not conservatives.
In the exact same.
You see, that's the problem.
Okay, so,
Is it
Tim,
all right if I jump in with something, right? Because
Yeah.
I've been
He's
reluctant.
a conservative. He's a moon lord, and I'm a
Slamus.
traditionalist.
I've been reluctant to interject because I don't want to just dogpile. And so I didn't want to get in on it.
Oh no, I'm
huge
here,
part of
I'm
that
here
argument.
for the dog
but
pile. I signed
you're
up.
not. I
I'm
promise.
sitting
I
in
promise
Ye's
you're
chair,
not.
right? This
I
is where
promise
Ye
you're
sat.
not.
Did Ye sit
Woof,
here?
woof.
No, I'm here for the dog pile.
So-
Let's do this.
I think when you talk about mental health and trying to solve the problem of mental health in this country, that is a deceptively simple way of putting it, right? Every single person in this room would have a very different idea of how that problem should be solved. And I agree with you that right now Republicans aren't doing a whole lot to talk about mental health issues, at least with respect to whatever
New York?
mental health issue that this specific person is dealing with.
But
But that's
New
because
York is not a Republican place.
No. I totally agree with that too. But I'm saying he was saying, why don't Republicans do more to advocate for
also,
mental
like-
health treatment? My point, however, is that I think the kind of advocacy you'd see from conservatives on how to solve the problem of bad mental health in the United States would be a much different set of policy prescriptions than you would want. So one example of this, right?
Actually, what Ian said.
So what Ian said, and there's a number of different directions you could take this in. My fundamental belief is that we live in a culture that encourages man to live in ways that man is not meant to live, and you just see negative health outcomes from that, both mental and physical. However, when you look at traditional psychological definitions of mental illness and how we used to treat it, back in the 1950s, you had about 500,000 people in the United States in insane asylums. By the 1980s, it's about 100,000. Okay, so without even adjusting for the increase in population size, there's a significantly lower number of people who are committed. And part of that is because the requirement to get somebody committed involuntarily to a mental health facility at that time was they can't take care of themselves. Today, they have to demonstrate that they are a danger to themselves and others first before they can be committed. Now, is someone not being able to take care of themselves necessarily the perfect indicator of whether they need to be committed to one of these institutions? I have no idea. However, what I do know is once we push the goalpost all the way in the other direction and say they have to demonstrate that they are a significant danger to themselves or others, oftentimes they don't get committed until after they've already hurt somebody. So it's a much more complicated situation than saying we just have to throw more money at this system when we don't even have a solid definition of what good mental health is, and also at which point someone should be committed.
So I think the important point, going back to what I agree. This is not a conservative show, but if you are in a cult, you wouldn't know that. You would only hear what the cult says.
So here's what I have to respond to that. If an objective person, say an alien, just showed up and looked at your channel, Tim, and went through all the videos, and you were to ask them, poll them, is this person and his views, where would you place them? Most likely they would say conservative. That's going to be my bet.
That's actually wrong.
Yes.
But more because the guests that come on
Not
tend
just
to
even
identify.
the guests, but the way they're framed, the thumbnails, the words that you put in red, and the whether or not you're supporting or going against one, either the Democrats or the Republicans. But hey, you tell me that you guys don't like the Democrats and you don't like the Republicans. This is not a Republican stream. You don't want to even endorse Republicans in any way, shape, or form, or vote for them.
I don't-
Big
Well,
no.
I don't
There's
vote
a
on
handful of
party
Republicans
lines
we do like.
personally.
Okay, sure. But there's a lot of right wingers who watch you. Right. So that's what I mean when I say you do have a voice and you do have an audience of right wingers who are going to vote at one point or
30%.
another. 30% of your audience is right wing.
Most of the people who watch this, the largest faction is libertarian.
Okay.
The next largest would be considered traditional liberal. Oh no, I think.
But along party lines, who are the libertarians going to vote for? Not the Libertarian Party. Most likely
Like,
they're going to vote for whoever.
When they come on this show and say abolish the police.
One of the two, Republican or Libertarian.
Yeah, most likely,
usually.
yes, one of the two. So that's why I say, Tim, for the people who watch you who are Republican leaning, why not frame it that way for them so that they can actually start pushing more money into that?
That's why I'm here.
That's
Basically, true, I think, in a lot of ways.
That's what Moonlord does.
So
you
here's,
said-
here's what I think. I think you're in a cult, right?
Okay.
I think the cult is derived from algorithms on social media.
Okay.
So you only surround yourself with this loud noise. We saw a really good example of this with that Sisson guy. Is that his name? Harry? I don't know.
Harry Sisson, yeah.
Those two guys went on the Tim Dillon podcast and he said, please, no, don't clip this. I will lose followers. I can rag on Trump all the time and like people still watch the show. Seamus and I can have an argument over me being pro-choice and him being pro-life, and people still watch the show. And if I pull up all sides with 3,770 ratings, Tim Pool is a centrist. But you think I'm conservative because you live in a bubble, right?
because I'm too far left, the Overton window is too far away, is what you're saying?
Yes. So like when I go hang out in Washington, D.C.,
Right.
And I do. I go to National Harbor or I go to Baltimore, Maryland Life. I'm in Baltimore.
I don't know
of all
why
places.
you do that. Washington, D.C.
The people who come up to me and are like, hey, man, I'm a big fan, are not conservatives. They hate Donald Trump. In fact, I was at a poker table last week and a guy said, I just hate Donald Trump. Man, I can't stand him. I wish somebody else would run, but I can't vote for Joe Biden. I think you're surrounded. We talk about this quite a bit.
Sure.
If all sides has nearly 4,000 people rating me and the end result is centrist, if I'm actively pro universal health care, not to the same degree as like Bernie Sanders, I believe in private health insurance, and I'm pro-choice, I am absolutely not a conservative in this country.
I've listened to your debates on pro-choice, though. You're pro-choice from a Tim Pool's perspective.
I'm pro-choice from a traditional liberal perspective, as
But
traditional liberals
not
have
from
been.
what people who would define themselves as pro-choice would say, right? Like you concentrate very heavily
Right, listen.
on the 9th month abortions and baby guillotines and stuff like that. Like
What?
Yeah, yeah. I remember watching you debate
Baby
about
guillotines?
Yeah. Okay, so baby guillotines is my own personal interpretation and joke of it. But you were talking about how women, how like disgusted you are that women may have an abortion in the 9th month, right? Or even
A viable baby.
of a viable baby
That could
and
live.
I wanted to scream at that time, being like, women who have abortions in the 9th month, they're not doing that because they got bored or all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't care anymore. They do that because it's a fucking tragedy. Like statistically, women who are getting abortions in the 9th month, it's because there's a medical complication that could kill them.
False
That's why
argument.
they have to do it. What do you
False
mean
argument.
false? That's the real world.
I already said viable. Try again.
What are you talking about, Tim?
I already said abortion
okay.
of viable fetuses
Oh
at
my
9
God,
months.
this is ridiculous.
Do you know what viable means?
Yes.
It means the baby can survive on its own without
on its
medical
own.
complications.
Absolutely. And
why
the women
legalize
and the-
abortion of viable fetuses at 9 months when the baby could just be
Women
delivered?
are not getting abortions at the 9th month for pleasure or because they want to suddenly do it for kicks. No, that doesn't happen.
Why
It's a
legalize it?
tragedy.
It
It's
does.
a tragedy
Why
of the
legalize
highest
it? Why
because
legalize it?
because there are medical operations that could kill the mother and they need to get an abortion.
Why legalize?
I just told you that's the reason why.
So all right, I'll try and break it down for you. Can the baby survive? Let's talk about a baby. The baby can survive on its own. Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Abortion is defined by Planned Parenthood and the law as terminating the life of the baby.
Correct.
Why terminate the life of the baby if it can survive on its own?
Because it could kill both of them. That's why it is done at that stage.
So how
It
do
could
you
kill
how do you
one
get-
or the
how do you
other,
get
and they
baby
have to
out?
make the tough decision at
how
that
do you-
point.
So how do you remove the fully formed 9-month baby at that point?
Oh, I don't know the science of it. I've never performed that operation
So
before.
shouldn't the law then be, if the baby must be removed and it is alive and capable of survival, all actions must be taken to preserve the life of the child and the mother?
I would say they'd probably choose the mother first, right?
Why?
And this is such a strange scenario. How often do you think that this happens and all of a sudden they're like, the baby could have lived. You could have done it. Why did you choose the other option? It's like, this is a tragedy of the highest order because they want to have the kid. At 9 months pregnant, a woman is on her way to give birth. So it's like, it's the worst possible fucking thing that could happen to her.
That's not always, again, I said I didn't want a dog pile,
No,
but
no,
that's,
good,
I mean, that's it's statistically not true. There have been surveys done on women who had later abortions, and for a pretty large sum of them, it's because they were not sure whether the father of the child was willing to commit. And then when they found out he wasn't willing to commit, they would have the abortion. And so there are different stats you're going to find for different points in pregnancy. When it comes all the way along to 9 months, I don't have the statistical data on that. However, I do know for later term abortions, there are reasons other than what is traditionally considered to be a medically necessary reason. For example, some people will say that a negative mental health outcome is a reason to abort a child later in pregnancy. So if the woman is depressed, they will list that as a reason for why the child had to be terminated to save the life of the mother, which is certainly not the case, very obviously. And to the point of what Tim is saying, when we say there's no such thing as a medically necessary abortion, the principle behind that is, if there is an operation which is necessary to save the life of the mother, and then she miscarries the child as a result of that operation, which was necessary to save her life, that's not an abortion because nobody's intent was to go in there and end the life of the unborn child. And so if a woman's having complications where she has to deliver early, you deliver the child early, of course. And if you're at a point in pregnancy where the child isn't viable, that's a horrible tragedy. You still do what you can to save the child, but you can't always save the child, and we understand that. But to go in and rip the child apart to end their life is never something which is medically required, even though an early delivery may be.
But are there situations where if the baby is in, this is so harsh, in its complete form, that even trying to induce early pregnancy could kill the mother, so they have to break the baby's body apart so that they can get it out without killing the mother?
I've never heard of such a thing.
So-
and there are letters, by the way, signed by literally thousands of doctors who have said this.
let me ask. Let me ask
Wait, can I
specifically.
just say one thing? So 88% of abortions are in the first 12 weeks. 88.
Yeah.
88% of abortions. Less than 1.3% of abortions take place near the 8th or 9th month.
How many
Is
abortions
that
is
Guttmacher?
Well, how many is that?
I don't know the actual numbers. This is the percentages.
13,000.
Okay, but we're talking about less than 1.3%.
Hold
of
on,
them.
13,000. That's the number of people who die from gun violence in the U.S. each year that aren't suicides.
Gentlemen,
so that's
I am not
13,000.
here to justify abortion when it happens as in it's a
But
good
you're
thing.
saying no.
I don't celebrate
Brother,
it.
You're saying it doesn't happen.
No.
You're saying
I've
it doesn't
never
happen.
said
It happens 13,000 times.
I said it's extremely. There is 338 million Americans. I'm sorry. The numbers are going to be a little daunting. Yes, the numbers will be high. I'm not here to celebrate that.
I don't understand your argument then.
My argument is that there's a lot of human beings.
13,000 people die from guns, we have a problem, right?
If 13,000 people die from guns, we have a problem. Yes, of
If
course.
13,000 late-term abortions happen, is that a problem?
These are completely different things.
Well, how so?
Okay, so if someone dies by a gun, have they been shot? Were they killed? Did they kill themselves? Was it a suicide? Was it a gang violence thing? Who knows?
That's a good question.
Can I clarify? I don't want to argue. I just
hold
want to
on,
clarify.
I need to answer this.
Well,
In the case
can
of
I
late,
address
yeah,
what you just said?
yes, but in the case of late-term abortions, more often than not, when statistics say, and when they are polled, they say the reason that they are giving it is because it's a medical complication that could result in the death of either the mother or the child.
All right. So let's. Can we make the argument then that the use of guns on people are allowed
The use of guns of people are
to end their lives is allowed?
so
you make
that's
that
murder. You're describing murder.
So if Colorado, for instance, passes a law saying there is no medical requirement for an abortion, is it wrong to kill the baby?
You're trying to compare murdering someone with a gun to a woman having to make a medical decision that could basically preserve her life.
No. I said
or
not
death.
a medical reason. That's what I'm saying.
Should she have the ability to have an abortion for any reason? Yes.
At 9 months.
At 9 months, I would say at 9 months, because it only happens according to the stats based on complete medical necessity. She has a right to do it.
That's not true.
She should have a right.
Hold on. Colorado legalized abortion up to 9 months with no medical reason required. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that decision. Yes.
So the baby could survive on its own, and the mother is legally now allowed to just end its life.
She has the right if she wanted to. You're saying so in Colorado, and
It's not a trick question. You're allowed to
I know,
believe that.
but I'm asking you because you're the one who brought this up. I don't know what Colorado's specific law says. So if you were saying that in Colorado, women have the ability at 9 months to have an abortion for any reason, they could just decide that they're
Elective,
bored.
yeah.
Okay, I think they should have the right to do that, but the stats show that they're not doing that. But they should have a legal right to do that. Yes, it's their body, it's their choice, of course.
So this is what I disagree on. I think if the baby needs to be removed from the woman, there's no reason to kill it. You know what I mean? Like you could just C-section and then put it for adoption.
But I'm telling you that doesn't happen.
But it does. But hold on.
Like you might be able to bring up anecdotes, but the stats don't say that.
But hold on. Like, why allow it to happen? I just don't understand. Are you arguing? Wait, hold on. Are you arguing you oppose it, and you think it's morally wrong, but you think it should be legal?
I think that women should have the right to decide what they do and have bodily autonomy over their own bodies.
We're not talking about her body. We're talking about...
It is her body. Of course it is. At 9 months, even if it's still inside her, it's still her body. Even if it's a viable baby, it's still her body.
But we're talking about the removal of the baby, yes?
The forceful removal of the baby, or...
Forceful.
So she chooses to have that. She should have the right.
The woman says the baby must be removed from my body. Why kill the baby if they're removing it?
I don't think they should do that. I would if they asked me, Lance, should I do this? I would say no, but she should have a right. Yes, of course. It's her body still. That doesn't stop.
So like the woman is pregnant, the baby is viable and capable of surviving on its own.
Sure.
And she says before it breaches oxygen, kill it. Do you think that should be allowed?
This is, again, the baby guillotines. This is why I brought that up.
But
what a weird scenario. This doesn't happen. This is not the real world.
But it does. And if the argument is that it doesn't happen enough for you to care, that's fine. You're allowed to believe that.
Sure.
What I don't understand is it seems like your position is a rather shocked position where you recognize there is something inherently wrong with taking the life of a baby that could survive on its own, but you're also taking the tribal position of women should be allowed to do it anyway.
No. If you were to ask me, Tim, hey, Lance, do you think it's a good idea if this woman who's 9 months pregnant, suddenly she got bored with the pregnancy, she doesn't want to have it anymore, but the baby's viable? Do you think that's a good thing to do? I would be like, no, of course not.
Then why should it be allowed?
Because it's still her right. It's still her body.
But
bodily autonomy doesn't stop at my morality. Tim, it's not my choice. Right? It's not my, yes, but that's not my choice.
Why kill it? Why kill it?
That's her choice, not mine.
Why kill the baby?
Ask her. Ask her.
Okay. So my point is simply this. You don't need to be shocked by it. You are allowed to have that moral position. I think most people in America would prescribe that to be, would ascribe evil to that.
Sure, but that's
the
your,
idea
you can
that
describe
would,
evil to whatever you want. That's up to you. That's your choice.
The idea that you would say
doesn't mean that she should
the
legally
woman
be
wants
restricted.
the baby removed, and then in the process, instead of letting the baby live, remove it but kill it, right? There's no reason to do that. You can give the baby up for adoption. You can drop the baby off on the doorstep of a post office.
I agree with you. I'm not disputing
So why
that.
legalize, even if it's one? Why legalize? You see, this is the craziest thing.
Because her autonomy should not be cut off based on your morality. Because you don't think that idea is good. You don't like it.
But the baby's been
that's
removed
not where
from
we
her
should
body.
determine it. Well, that's if it was removed from her body and it was still viable. Right? And that's where the baby guillotines come in, because I don't think this happens. I don't think women on the 9th month get abortions with viable living children and then be like, I don't want it, kill it. I don't think that happens.
You don't have to think it happens, but statistically it does, because your entire argument is this only happens for reasons of the health of the mother or the health of the unborn child.
I said,
so you believe it only
I said the
happens because there's
statistics show that at the 9th month, if a woman is going to have an abortion, it's typically because it's a medical complication that could either endanger her or the child's life.
And what I am saying
let
is
me-
there
let
are
me-
doctors who will justify that by saying the medical complication is she is depressed. That is literally one of the reasons given in surveys of women. And another reason that is given is that I didn't know if the man who I was going to be with.
Okay, but Seamus, I got to stop you because this is a nebulous argument that doesn't get anywhere, and I can respect the point that if you go to if you try and look this up, you're going to find left-wing sources and right-wing sources that will contradict each other. So my question is strictly on the legality of terminating the life of a child. I can sit here and pull up, oh, hey, here's one. Women abort Down syndrome babies late term rather frequently. I think that's wrong. I don't think that someone's life is forfeit because they have Down syndrome. But your argument is that they do.
No, it's not. That's a strong.
No. Your argument is that women have a right to terminate a baby for any reason at any point.
Yes, they should have the bodily autonomy to make that decision.
So what I'm
Yes.
saying is, in the circumstance of Down syndrome, I think it is wrong to terminate a baby's life at 9 months simply for having Down syndrome, but you would agree she is legally allowed to do so.
I think she should be legally allowed to do so. Whether or not I think that's a good idea is irrelevant.
Well, then there's the clarification. I think
Yeah.
it should be illegal.
Okay.
I think
So there are limits to how much bodily autonomy women should have.
so. Yes, right.
So that's okay. So that's your stance.
The pro-choice argument, because you're pro-abortion, right?
Sure.
Pro-choice traditionally in this country put limits at around like 15 to 16 weeks, meaning if the baby is dependent upon the body of the mother, then it is the body of the mother and she has final say. If the baby is viable, it can be removed in a process that ends the pregnancy but doesn't end the life of the baby. That's kind of like the compromise where the baby gets to live and the woman no longer has to be pregnant. There seems to be this amoral argument where, well, but it just kill the baby anyway, which doesn't make any logical sense. That's the pro-abortion side. So if you go back to the 90s, if you go back to safe, legal, rare, et cetera, if you even look at Tulsi Gabbard in 2020, that's where I'm at. Conservatives are pro-life outright. Seamus would argue abortion in any capacity should be banned entirely. I'm in the traditional Democrat position. But you see, there is a tribal, amoral, illogical position of just let them kill the baby regardless. I don't see any logic there. I don't see how that makes sense morally or ethically or just mathematically.
Right. So you said I'm pro-abortion. What I'm against is forced birth, and I don't think the state should be forcing women to give birth against their will, which is what your position and your position is as well. So I'm against that. I think that's creepy big government shit. I don't think they should be forcing them and turning them into these viable wombs against their will.
I completely agree. I'm against forced birth, just like you.
Cool.
Except my difference is that if the baby's at 8 months and can survive, they can take the baby out as if they would have an abortion, but not kill it in the process.
If it's a viable at 8 months, is it viable?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is viable at 8 months, dude. There have been babies after 20 weeks.
Bro,
that
your
have been-
whole position is that women have a right to kill the baby even if they end the pregnancy, and there's no logic there.
The logic is that I don't think you agree with forced birth at a point.
How?
How at 8 months? At 8 months, Tim Pool thinks forced birth is fucking cool and poggy.
Stop making up stupid bullshit.
But
dude.
No,
hold on.
That's what this is.
Bro.
This is 100%.
Nonsense,
100% forced birth.
nonsense statement. Because I already said I agree with you.
No,
a woman,
you agree
a woman
with me
should be
up
able
to a
to end her
point.
pregnancy
You
whenever she
agree with
wants.
me up to 8 months,
A
Tim.
woman could end her pregnancy whenever she wants. Say it. Tim Pool said a woman can end her pregnancy whenever she wants.
Yeah,
I demand you
aborting
say
is
it.
giving birth by both ending a pregnancy.
Make up something fake. Tim Pool agrees with forced birth is a false statement. You're lying. I have already said I believe that women have a right to terminate their pregnancy up to a certain amount of time.
At 8 months is where you draw the line.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you just said that. If the baby is viable, that she shouldn't have the right to be able to terminate it.
To
right?
kill the baby.
Yes.
I
Yes.
said she can end the pregnancy whenever she wants.
And ending the pregnancy can be giving birth or aborting the
or
baby.
a C-section that keeps the baby
so
alive.
she has to be forced to give birth against her will in a C-section, but the baby is viable and they give it
So
off.
how do they remove
So
the
hold
baby
on.
at 8
Either way, the
months?
baby comes out of her. You're saying
Right,
that it's more
so you literally want forced birth. You literally
No,
want to force women
dude,
to give birth
hold
against their
on.
will.
So,
Can I just
you're saying
interject here? Can I
you're
please just
saying
make-
they should use the tools to rip apart the body and pull that out. Whereas I'm saying they should just take the
No,
baby
I'm saying
out.
she should have the right to decide what happens to her body. That's it.
Okay, but all right, either way, the child is coming out. You're making this argument about forced birth. Either way, what is in her body is going to be outside of it. The question is it okay to shove forceps into the skull of the small person who's inside of her and then tear them apart limb by limb to get them out? Or should we say, no, that's not an acceptable way of delivering a baby. You shouldn't kill that unborn child. How is that for either way it comes out of her body? Either way the child comes out of her body. It's not as if there's one scenario where the pregnancy magically disappears and doesn't leave the body.
Let me add, forced birth is a nonsense politics statement.
But in your scenario, she's being forced to give birth against her will. Like she can't
She's
decide.
already pregnant, dude.
I know, but
we're not talking about forcing her to do anything.
But then
She's
endorse,
pregnant.
But then endorse that position.
I did.
Stick by it.
I know, I reject there's no such thing as forced birth. They're saying you can't kill that baby.
Let me tell you how fascinating this is.
Because she
the
has
left
the baby inside her.
is so
Yes, she does.
fervent
Has the baby inside
about
of her.
legalizing the killing of a baby at 9 months that I can sit here and say I think women should be able to terminate their pregnancy whenever they want. But if the baby is viable, there's no reason to kill it.
She has to be forced to give it. Then she has to be forced to give birth and then give the baby up. Is what you're saying?
Give birth. Define.
Yes. Okay. So that is forced birth, right?
So
she can't decide to terminate it at 8 or 9 months.
Define give birth.
You just said at 8 months if the baby is viable.
I didn't say 8 months. Define give birth. I'm trying to understand what you're saying by forced birth. What does birth mean?
You just said when she is at
Can you
8 or
define
9
it?
months. Okay, so she's at 8 or 9.
I said viable.
Okay, so it's viable. The baby's viable. She should have to give birth to it in some capacity. C-section, whatever.
Define birth, and I can answer your question.
Birth, the removal of a child into the world from a mother's womb.
So how do they do that?
The woman pushes the baby out.
So then what would you call an abortion at 8 months?
Abortion?
Is the woman pushing the baby out?
No, it's most likely a medical procedure done by a doctor.
And what is that medical procedure?
An abortion.
But what is that?
What is an abortion?
Yes, like what?
How is it done?
Yes.
I'm not entirely sure how it's done at 8 months. I know
trying to-
earlier on it's usually done with a series of tools. I don't know how it's done at 8 or 9
Okay,
months,
so
to be
your
honest.
moral argument is forced birth. I'm trying to understand what your position is. If you don't know how an abortion is done, then are you in favor of forced birth?
Am I in favor of forced? No, I'm against forced birth.
But you think that women should have to expel the baby, right?
It's completely fine for me not to know the medical procedure of how abortion is done to stand up for the rights of a woman's body. I don't need to know how people perform abortions directly. I'm not going to lie here. I'm not going to pretend
removing
that I know.
a baby from a woman's body is birth.
Oh, so you're saying it doesn't count?
No,
It's
I'm
birth
trying to-
of a different nature.
I don't think you have a definition, and I'm trying to understand what you mean by forced birth, but if you can't define the removal of the baby in a different way, I don't know what you're saying.
Birth, Tim, like the birth of a child.
So is a C-section a birth?
Sure, yes, it is a form of extracting a living child that is viable to live in the real world.
That's how you define birth, extracting a living child to live in the real world.
No, I would define birth as someone giving birth. They are pushing a baby out of their body.
So I don't think women should be forced to do that, right?
You don't think women should be forced to push babies out of their body?
But the baby is in their body, so it's got to come out somehow.
So you're going to take it out with a C-section?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm trying to figure out what you mean by this.
So that would be forced birth. So she's forced to give and make a viable child, live in the real world.
I mean,
outside
right,
of
so
her
when
body.
you're pregnant, the baby's
right,
going
yeah.
to come out of you
Right.
at some point.
That's the
Either
point.
we rip
no
it
matter
apart
what
or
happens,
you give birth
the baby
naturally.
is coming out of the woman, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I
So
agree.
there's no being in favor of that or not. It happens. Period.
Yes.
Okay. So what's your point?
What's my point?
Am I in favor of a natural process by which a woman has to have a baby removed from her no matter what anyone says or does?
Your point is that at 8 or 9 months, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Tim.
You are wrong. Yes, I'll stop you right there because
Fine.
because when you keep saying 8 or 9 months, that's not what I said over and over and over again.
Viability is after 6 months.
Viability is
Okay, that means that there's
So as
more
soon-
than a
as soon-
50%
but
chance of
you're also
survival.
wrong. It's
There have
not
been
6
babies like
months.
So
As
as soon as
24
the baby
weeks.
It's not 6 months.
So as soon as the baby is
24 weeks.
viable, Tim, as soon as the baby is viable, then it's okay for the woman, even if she doesn't want to have it anymore for whatever reason, she should have to be forced to have it extracted from her and then live. Is that correct? Is that your position?
Well, it's not forcing the woman to have a baby live if the baby's already alive. You see what I'm saying? Like, you
Right,
can,
so you're- okay,
here's
so
a
we're talking about this is semantics. This
I got
is
a
all
compromise for you.
semantics.
I got a compromise
Sure.
for you. We'll tell the mother we killed it, but we'll sneak it off and give it to someone else. Does that work for you?
No, because I still think she should have autonomy. She should have the right to do it if she wants to. Of course.
She should kill the baby after
she
it's already
shouldn't.
born?
I don't want her to kill a baby. I want
Then
her to
why
have,
do you keep saying it?
Because I want her to have the ability to choose. That's different, and that is a fundamental part of this.
The baby's out of her body, right?
Forcibly. In
No,
your
no, no, no,
scenario.
no. Let's say
She-
24 weeks. The woman goes to the doctor and says, I want this baby out of me. And the
What if she says, I don't want to have this baby?
I don't want to have this baby.
Okay.
Okay. And the doctor says, I will remove it.
Okay.
Uh-oh, the baby's alive. What do we do?
So you forced her to give birth.
No. She said, doctor, I'd like an abortion. He says, you got it. Step
And so
right up.
he's lying to her.
No. He does the abortion and it fails. And
An abortion is terminating a pregnancy. So there's no such thing as a trick abortion. You can't trick.
They're called failed abortions.
Failed abortions where
Yes.
doctors trick
right.
women into taking the babies out?
No. So when they perform the abortion, as Seamus explained, they stick metal tools into the brain, scramble it up, and rip its body parts apart, and then pull it out chunk by chunk.
Okay.
When the babies are smaller, sometimes they pull them out, but the babies don't die; they survive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my question is, in the instance of a failed abortion, what should be done?
A failed abortion being that the child is living, it's
Yes.
outside of the mother.
Yeah.
At that point, you cannot kill that child. That would be murder.
Oh, okay.
Agreed on that point.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, where does the mother's choice come in to kill?
Before that procedure takes place.
So
She has a choice to choose what she wants to have done with her body. If she goes to a doctor and the doctor's like, I'm going to perform an abortion, which the assumption would be that I'm about to terminate the child, but then he just secretly sneaks the child out of there, that's not performing an abortion. You're just being deceptive.
Yeah, and the doctor should go to prison if they did something like that, in my opinion.
I think you go to
absolutely.
prison if you should go to prison if he performs an abortion.
Snap.
Yeah.
I heard that.
Yeah.
Not surprised.
Opposite perspective.
So there's also something that none of us know, because I don't think any of us are medical doctors. The difference on the physiology of the female body giving a 9-month abortion, having that happen, or the actual birthing process, whether by C-section or natural birth, it might have vastly different consequences on the female body. So that's something to take into account.
so wait. Remember the Born Alive Act?
Yes.
That was a Republican position, wasn't it? What was that?
Yeah, so there have been a couple of different Born Alive acts in different years, but what they basically say is that if the abortion fails, it is not legal to kill the child.
Wasn't that Republicans were trying to pass
The
a law?
Republicans were trying to pass that. That was one of the only things Obama voted on in the Senate. He voted against it.
Obama voted against it. But you
yes.
would be in favor of that.
In favor of what?
The Born Alive Act.
I'm not completely familiar with it, so I'd have to read
If an
up on it
infant is
first.
born alive after an attempted abortion, it has the same protection of law and degree as a newborn.
Yeah, I would be okay with that, because at that point it's a human. If you're killing a person that is alive outside of a womb, then that's murder, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Can I ask you,
that's
this is
good.
not a gotcha.
We agree on that. That's great.
I want to ask in good faith. So
Yeah, of course.
you believe that the moment after the child is outside of the birth canal,
Sure.
that they are now endowed with human rights.
Yes.
However, when they are inside of the mother, literally anything you do to them is acceptable because they're inside of the mother.
Oh no, I don't think anything is acceptable, but I think the mother should still have the choice, ultimate authority over what happens to her body.
But there's a child inside of her body,
Hold on.
and not
What
her.
about
Yes.
meth?
Like, should she be allowed to do meth?
Yeah.
I think if someone is doing meth while they're pregnant, that it is completely acceptable for something like, I don't know what the name of the services in the United States.
Child services?
I guess
Child
DCFS
services?
would be.
Oh,
yeah.
it's her body, though.
Yeah, it's her body.
If she wants to do meth, what's the big deal?
The big deal is that she's intentionally trying to kill a child.
Hold on there a minute.
Yeah, and I see where we're going.
I don't understand what you're saying. It's her body.
It's her
if
body.
She wants to do meth. What's the problem?
Well, first off, doing meth is illegal, period. Doesn't matter if you're doing it with a child or without a child.
Not in Oregon.
Methyl and MDMA. It's a type
Maybe
of
it's
meth.
alcohol
Wait,
then.
sorry, what?
Not crystal meth.
Crystal meth
There's
is legal in
different kinds
Oregon?
of-
it's
not crystal.
Hold on a second. Did I?
MDMA is a kind of meth. Methylendaxy, methamphetamine is ecstasy. That's a kind of meth. There's also crystal meth, which is not legal. MDMA is legal in some places for therapy sessions. I don't know if it's legal for
Yes,
very
it is.
pregnant women.
Okay, it is.
Is it for pregnant
Oregon
women? I don't know.
decriminalized possession in
Oh,
2021.
you were right.
But I don't know if
But
that's...
I'm just okay, dude. So like,
decriminalizing possession is different than legalizing crystal meth. You know those two things are completely different, right?
Uh,
If
What's
you're-
the question
if
of whether you
you're-
can press charges?
hold on.
Yeah.
What?
So when you decriminalize a small amount of drugs, that means if you're caught with that drugs by a cop, that means if you're arrested, you cannot be charged for 1 gram, 2 grams, whatever
that's
that
what
is.
legalizing is.
No, this is decriminalization, not legalization. We never said
There's no such thing.
legalization.
Legalization is a semantic term. It doesn't mean anything.
Yes, it means
Either a
that
substance is no
there's
longer
no
criminal.
longer a prohibition on that product.
Okay, so if a woman does meth, she's legally allowed to have it, right?
Is she legally allowed to do it or possess it?
I mean, what's the difference?
Well, two very different things. You can be legally allowed to possess drugs and not be legally allowed to take drugs, for example.
Alcohol.
So she does alcohol.
Can a woman chug a fifth of vodka while pregnant?
Yeah, she can legally.
But do you think she has a right to do so?
I think she has a right to do. Yes, she has a right to do it. I don't agree with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And heroin?
It's illegal.
I don't think heroin's illegal. I think heroin actually was legalized. I think it's controlled, but I think that one specifically was oxycodone and other drugs. So
she has a right to do it. Whether or not I agree with her doing it, that's completely different. I don't agree with a woman who would have an elective abortion at 9 months. I think that is like, why the fuck would you have done that? But I think she has the right to do it, right?
But do you think it's ethical that she like?
Oh, I don't think it's
legal
ethical. No, of course not.
because some things are made legal that are unethical, in my opinion. And should those be made illegal?
I mean, that's a very broad question, right?
No,
You're talking about a lot
I'm
of
sorry.
different things.
Personal use of methamphetamine is allowed. It's a civil citation, like a traffic ticket, not a criminal citation. So allowed maybe is hyperbolic. It is a civil citation to be caught using methamphetamine in Oregon. You get a ticket for it, but no crime.
So I just looked up the Born Alive Act, by the way. It says this bill is deliberately misleading and offensive to pregnant people and doctors and nurses who provide their care. It is another attempt by anti-abortion politicians to spread misinformation as a means to get a warped political end, to ban safe and legal abortion. It's an entry point to try and make abortion illegal.
Where did you read this?
Okay,
and what
no,
source is this
hold on,
from?
no. I don't care. I mean, who cares about the Born Alive Act? The question was, if an abortion happens but the baby survives, can you kill it? And Lance already said no. So we're done with that.
So he would, yeah, for sure.
So any other political arguments, anyone left, right, or otherwise trying to change that, no, it's irrelevant. Once the baby's born, it's a baby.
Yeah. So it has the same rights as every other human at that point, right? It's an American.
This is an interesting. I think this falls in line with the idea of anarcho-tyranny that we were talking about. My view of the modern left is that their positions are nothing but chaos. There's no logical pathway towards preserving life, improving people's lives. It seems to be only. It's like yin yang. Right? There's one side that's talking about long-term planning, logical thinking, and improving the world, and one side that takes the inverse position no matter what. For instance, 25 people push in front of a subway, nobody bats an eye. Three guys try to subdue a man, and now they want prison. That's like a weird inversion of what the law is supposed to do. The law should stop the people who are pushing people on the trains and protect the people on the train who are being victimized. But the left's position is the inverse of it, right?
Are you asking me for like
an
affirmation of that? Because if you ask me,
no, I'm just saying like that's my view.
So
and that was the end of my statement.
when you say the left's idea are all chaos, I mean, if you really wanted to boil down what the left is fighting for, especially myself, it's expanding freedom. I believe in freedom. I love freedom. I'm sure everyone here likes freedom too, right? You're all about freedom.
How do you define freedom exactly?
So for me, I believe in a democratic process where we don't have tyrants, we don't have dictators, we don't have kings or queens. We have the ability as a democracy to be able to vote for who we work for, or sorry, who our leaders are, right? Like we want to be able to vote for our president, our prime minister. I believe in that fundamentally. But my other thing is I want to expand that freedom into the workplace because we spend about 8 hours a day every single day in our works, our jobs. I want to expand freedom there. So people who work at their jobs for 8 hours a day have the ability to vote for things in their lives, better healthcare, better working conditions, whether or not their boss is corrupt and stealing from all of them. I want to expand that. I want to expand freedom into other parts of life. That's a fundamental belief for me.
So what do you mean by stealing from them?
Stealing wages, for example.
Like actually shorting someone's check and
so the largest form of theft in America right now is wage theft. If you look,
I had it happen to me. I sued. I went to the National
Good for
Labor
you.
Board and we won.
How does it happen?
as you should. So there's a ton of
Not
ways.
paying overtime.
Not paying overtime. Bosses simply just garnishing checks or garnishing wages, stealing tips, or thinking that tips are justification to pay them lower salaries and stuff like that.
Yep.
All of it bullshit. And when you look at theft, you look at the stats, right? Cars being stolen, jewelry, all that. Wage theft blows everything out. Like they're not even comparable. It's one down here and then it's like the other one's fucking all the way up there.
I got a story for you. So I worked at a company. I get a paycheck. I'm good at math and stuff. And so I look at it and I'm like, hey, there's a problem with my paycheck. And they go, no, it's good. I'm like, no, it isn't. There's a problem with my paycheck. Fix it. And I very quickly was like $67 missing. I want it fixed and I want it fixed now. And they went, give us a few minutes. Came back 15 minutes later, handed me a check. I looked at it and said, are you joking? And they were like, huh? And I was like, this is wrong. I'm not an idiot. Fix my paycheck. Went to a couple other employees. I said, let me see your paychecks. I looked and I went, come with me. walked right to the National Labor Board in Chicago and said, this is what they did. They took our statements. We went to the company and we told them we were going to form a union because of what they had done. They fired us on the spot for doing it. We sued them. And then I'll give you air quotes in saying we won. What actually happened was after 6 months of being out of work, they said you can get retro pay, which will be $7,000 each, or we can go to fight and then they'll give you your job back. And I'm like, if they give us our job back, they're going to retaliate against us. No, that's illegal. And I was like, oh, come on. So we won the fight, but it really means they were able to fire us to stop us from forming a union.
So what would be a better example of expanding? Sorry, Seamus, you can say
Oh, no,
something.
no. I just want to make the point. I haven't seen the stats on wage theft causing more in losses than all other forms of theft combined. I'll just have to take your word for that, and I'm willing to grant that for the sake of
I think that's
this discussion.
true.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm willing to grant it if that is the case, and at the very least for the sake of argument. I certainly don't agree in involuntarily democratizing all workplaces. That's probably a much longer, interesting economic discussion. Happy to engage in it with you guys too. And I suspect we would all have different views on it. I don't know if you want to go to other issues or if you want to talk about that.
have
Because I would
a
like to
very big
talk
issue I
about
wanna
that.
talk about as well.
Budweiser.
You're going to move to Bud? Because I do want to talk about LGBTQ plus
We got to do it.
rights. That's why I'm here.
And Budweiser opens that door. Ladies and gentlemen, the Anheuser-Busch CEO has finally disavowed the Dylan Mulvaney ad in private to investors, though he's not made a public statement. Sales are down 26%. They're going to be giving out free cases of beer to distributors, and they've vowed to spend millions of dollars in marketing. But the boycott is particularly effective, I would say. And there's videos now coming out of people at sporting events where the Bud Light is just behind the counter totally full and everyone's buying other brands. So did Ian and Seamus both just leave at the same time?
Yeah, I don't know where they went, but they
ran
did just
for
both
it.
leave.
So
yeah.
let's jump into this. What are your thoughts on the Budweiser thing?
My thoughts are keep going. You're doing awesome. All of you. I mean this. To every single person protesting Bud Light, fuck yes. I am so here for this. It's fucking amazing.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hell
but Budweiser sucks. Anheuser-Busch sucks. It's a massive multinational corporation.
They're
that's absorbing...
super anti-LGBTQ plus, so it's been beautiful to see. I love it. Oh, they donate so much to right-wing Republicans who push
Agreed.
anti-LGBTQ laws. So Anheuser-Busch getting taken down. Oh man, I'm so here for it. Keep
Me
going.
too. Absolutely. Yeah. They think that they can pay off Republicans. They can hire GOP aides, and that is going to be satisfactory for their customers who are upset with them as a brand. So clearly what we can see, where I think we agree, is that Anheuser-Busch is a faceless corporation with no real values that is willing to spit in the faces of the little guy if it earns them a profit. They're a trash company and nobody should buy their products. The left and the right both agree. Here. Unity for once. I hope they fail.
Same thing with Disney. Keep going after Disney. I'm
Absolutely.
all for it. Take Disney down. I'm all for the right wing taking on Disney, all for the right wing taking on Anheuser-Busch. Yes, of course. These are terrible fucking corporations. I'm all here for it. By the way, the Daily Mail is like the #1 source on the show, right? Like every single time you pulled it up. Because that same site that you showed me, All Sides Media Bias, it has the Daily Mail on right wing. And I know that you yourself, when you
Yeah,
pulled
they're
it
actually
up,
fantastic. The Daily Mail.
But if you use them as a primary source, you understand why I'd say that. Like
We don't use them as a primary source.
Okay.
What happens is when we pull up stories, I'll go to like CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, ABC, and they'll each have like 300 words. And then you go to the Daily Mail after doing a search on key elements of the story, and the Daily Mail will have like 7 different versions of all breaking down different components. Okay. Like if you scroll down the Daily Mail, they often do these special sections where they have entirely different stories within the story, providing more context. Like for instance, this story from the Daily Mail not only talks about the current story with the CEO, but it even goes all the way into all of the context going back to the commercial that was released, the sale drop at 6% in the first week, to the video. It like covers literally every, even as a photo of the VP and her husband, how in-depth this story is. So it's like if I'm going to pull up a single article, I can pull up 5 ABC, CBS, New York Times, or I can just pull up this one that has seemingly everything in it, including Kid Rock, including John Rich, including Bud Light being poured into a dumpster.
Yeah,
it's a massive aggregator.
Yeah.
But honestly, I have no problem with y'all going after fucking Bud Light. Have a time, go nuts. I have a really big problem with what I feel on this show is a lot of anti-trans hysteria and fear-mongering that takes place.
You want to open that book?
I have that book at home. We can talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
And I'm totally comfortable talking about that book. I've read it.
Should it be in schools?
I want to talk to you about the trans issue, though, because
right. And that's that's why I ask about the book.
Okay,
it opens
we can get to the books and the schools, the curriculums, and everything that the Florida's taken away. But you are you profess to be kind of like fact-based, science-based, right?
Yeah.
Like you pull up. I've noticed you want to pull up stats and figures and stuff like that.
Of course.
Why is it that you push propaganda when it comes to trans people?
Like what?
That is so far beyond the pale.
Like what?
Okay, let's start with gender affirming care. Gender affirming care, you're very, very against. I've heard you call it mutilation.
I don't call it mutilation. I've never said that.
That's what you say on your show.
I do.
No, I
I
don't.
don't know if he does. I call it
I
mutilating
don't.
children.
I call it child sex change.
When you were talking about Dwayne Wade moving his family,
Someone in the crowd said, "Why are you mutilating your son?" That was a quote from someone else. I didn't say that. I call it.
But then you made
and
it.
I've explicitly said I don't take the right agitator approach of calling it mutilation because that's not effective in having a conversation. I will plainly call it a child sex change as what it is. I'm not going to call it gender affirming or mutilation because I don't think those things accurately explain what it is.
Okay, so when it comes to gender affirming care, 0 to about 10.
Are you talking about child sex change?
No, I'm talking about gender affirming care. 0 to about 10 years
You got to
old.
define
The
it.
answer
You
is
gotta define
yes.
it. You got to
Yeah.
define it, okay? Because if you're talking about something different, tell
Okay.
us what you're talking about.
All right, so if someone is trans and they are young, and until they are about 10 years old before they go through puberty, gender affirming care would be in the form of you using different pronouns, preferred pronouns, and allowing them to dress differently.
Yeah, I don't care about that.
Do you have a problem with that? Does anyone
Yeah.
here?
Yes, I do.
I don't.
Okay, so both of you don't.
Right.
Okay, so do you accept that there is no surgery being performed on children at that age, from 0 to about 10? There's nothing, there's no hormone blockers, there's no puberty blockers?
There is hormone blockers. I don't think surgery is happening on
Okay,
kids
so
under 12.
So hormone blockers aren't given to children until they go through puberty.
That's not true. We actually pulled this up with Destiny. He actually called me out. I was wrong about a stat.
Okay.
What we found was 47,000 cross-sex hormones. I think it was something like 17,000 puberty blockers and like 2,000 double mastectomies for girls after the age of 13 or whatever. But
So that doesn't apply to anything I just said.
puberty blockers were preteen. Puberty blockers.
Yes, puberty blockers
They
are
have
given
to
to someone.
because they have to give them the puberty blockers before puberty starts.
Yes, of course.
Right.
So you, okay, so you're just reaffirming what I just said. From 0 to 10 till you're about to go through puberty, gender affirming care only comes in the form of using different pronouns, using different names, allowing them to dress differently, and that's it. And you don't have a problem with that.
Wait, Lupron too?
Okay, so we'll get to Lupron, but up to that point, you don't have a problem with any of this yet, right?
I'm saying,
and you agree that there is no surgery being performed on children at that age. Zero to 10.
Let me just start from the beginning so I can make sure I'm getting what you're saying right.
Yeah.
I don't care if parents call their kids names or whatever. I care about medical or surgical intervention.
Okay, so that doesn't happen until about the age of about 16. That's the average age for.
But you're wrong. Okay, like and look, we had Destiny on the show. We went into great detail about it. There are girls who are 13 who are getting this done, and there was a study. Actually, it was Canadian, I believe. 12 to 17, they had several hundred surgeries performed.
Okay, so again,
I'll try
I said
for
the
you.
average age, but if you want to say that there are people who get this at 12, that could be the case.
Who would have it? I think
Let's start with puberty blockers, Tim. Lupron. You both have a big problem with Lupron?
I don't know a lot about it, but I consider it a medical treatment.
Okay.
Yeah. We shouldn't be giving Lupron to kids.
So you don't think you should give Lupron to kids? Why don't you want Lupron being given to trans kids?
Because it's a puberty blocker that inhibits the natural function and development of their body. And more importantly, I think my view is built upon what we've seen out of Europe already, right? So earlier on, maybe a few years ago, I was more agnostic on the issue until Sweden, Denmark, Finland abandoned this and the Tavistock Center got shut down. And the data they released said this actually caused more harm than good. And then I was like, well, okay, hey, how about that? And for some reason, in the United States, they're still hell-bent on moving forward with what we can already see from, better countries with better healthcare systems saying no to this, right?
Okay, so I can address those individually because I have the explanation as to why that happened. When it comes to Lupron, 0 to 10 is about the age where gender affirming care only comes in the form of different names, pronouns, stuff like that. We can all agree that's completely fine.
We can't. I mean, I disagree. Yeah, no, I disagree. You three can agree, but I don't.
Fine. Okay, fine. But it's their show, so I just want to concentrate on them for 2 seconds.
My position is more just like, I don't know, man, like social therapy stuff. They say that after puberty, desistance rates are between 65 and like 92%.
Okay, so that's completely false. I'll get to that. We have to do this.
Come on, bro.
We have to do this piece by piece first. Okay.
Oh,
let's get through Lupron.
Hey,
first.
I just proved you wrong. Studies show
recorded.
10 follow-up studies found desistance of 61 to 98%.
Yeah. Can you click on the Wikipedia article? Detransition topics.
Oh, you're missing the mic. Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Missing the mic, buddy.
What are the studies? Where are we talking about? I would like to know if you are taking these studies specific. Well, because I have each one of them written down here, and I'm quite curious. Is the Drummond study one of them? Is the Wallen study? Is Stensma, the Swedish study, a part of this? The 2011 study?
Probably, I don't know.
Well, no, we should know. This is incredibly important for what we're talking about.
It's not. This is 2018. This is Gender Dysphoria in Adolescents, Current Perspectives in the National Library of Medicine.
Okay, scroll down to the conclusion of this one. Just out of curiosity.
Want to get the mic again?
Oh, sorry.
You can carry it around. with you.
Yeah.
Move it. I gotta get used to this.
Yeah, dog.
I know. Scroll down to the conclusion of the study.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to at least skim some of the what the numbers and reference are to, like the reference.
While you're skimming, when I think of a little kid
like
being
outcomes,
like a little boy being
psychiatric
like
disorders.
I'm a girl. The parent, I would hope that the parent would be like, you can be you can pretend to be whatever you want. You can be an actor. You can play a girl. But I get afraid when a mom's like, he said he's a girl. That means he's trans.
Right. So for this, it's not a process. It doesn't exist in which someone can say, hey, I'm a boy, I'm a girl. And then they go into a doctor's office and like, well, take some Lupron. It's you do years and years of consultation between a doctor and between like a therapist and between the patient itself.
I'm just going to read this.
Sure, of course.
Adolescence is a crucial time for identity and psychosexual development in young people with gender identity concerns. The outcomes of GDC have been discussed in terms with its persistence and desistance. For most children with GDC, whether GD will persist or desist will probably be determined between the ages of 10 and 13 years, although some may need more time. Evidence from the 10 available prospective follow-up studies from childhood to adolescence, reviewed in the study by Ristori and Steensma, indicate that for around
it is Steensma. I was right. I asked if this was Steensma. Okay, I can answer this
80% of children who meet the criteria for GDC.
Right.
But you said 2011.
Oh, so there's multiple Steensma studies. They've actually built upon each other. And the problem with the Steensma study, unfortunately, is that they actually categorized people who were not trans in that study. They didn't compare people who were trans to people who were trans and then detransitioned. They compared people in the general population.
What's your source? What's your source for that?
The actual author of the study has come out since and said that
what can I pull up to confirm that?
Okay.
Like, because look, I pulled up a study that said a thing. You've made a counterclaim. I will pull it up.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so go to...
Because I don't know who Steensma is.
Okay, so, Steensma, and the problem, I'll say one more thing because I had this written down. 45.3% of the people did not reapply for treatment. They counted that as people who were detransitioning when they weren't, in fact, doing that.
Wait, so can I ask you something?
Yes, okay, so he asked for the source. Let's do things in order.
I'm going to respond to what you just said.
Advocate.
I need to respond to what you just said right now.
That last point is kind of important to respond to.
Okay.
We're literally talking about desistance.
Right.
If they're including people who desisted, you'd have to get the number of those who desisted.
They included people who did not reapply for treatment. They counted that as someone who was desisting. That's just someone who didn't show up again. That's
literal desistance.
No, it's not. It's not.
That's literal desistance.
Not whatsoever, Tim. That is someone who has decided they just don't want to go talk to that doctor or experience things with that doctor. They could have gone off to a different doctor. They could have done something else. But that is not someone who has verifiably said, I was trans, I'm no longer trans. That's just people who did not show up.
Your thing.
Okay. So go to transadvocate.com/
I'm not going to I need a study or something, not an advocacy website.
Okay,
I pulled up a scientific study for you. I'm not pulling up a nonprofit.
Good job.
Advocacy
So
group.
this is an interview with the person who did the study in this article.
I have pulled up a scientific study for you.
And the person who did, and I'm challenging you with the person who did the fucking study. And
but
then
you're telling me to pull up an advocacy website, which is not on par with a scientific study.
But it's featuring the person who did the scientific
study. Is there
study.
A counter study saying this is not correct?
Okay. Yes. An overwhelming amount. Okay, sure.
Let me pull that up.
Okay. Can you
look? If I pull up the NIH,
sure,
and then you say go to transadvocate.com, you understand why I'm not going to do this.
Cool. Cornell University.
I'm not going to Breitbart for my source on desistance. Okay.
Sounds good. Cornell University did a meta study.
What is it?
Okay, Cornell University did a meta study on 55 different studies. Just start looking up Cornell University meta study on detransition. Cornell University did a meta study on 55 different studies on detransitioning. Of those 55, they found 52 of the studies showed that people detransitioned at a rate of less than 4%. And of those people who did it, the reason they detransitioned was social stigma. That's 52 of the 55. The other 3 of those 55, they didn't show a net negative effect. There was not a single study of the 55 that Cornell University looked at that showed detransitioning or gender affirming care being a bad thing for trans people. If anything, it was a net positive. This is a meta study of a whole bunch of studies. I have another meta study.
So wait, but hold on.
But I'm trying
wanna-
to pull up a scientific study to confirm what you're saying.
Yeah, I also
give me
just want to ask a
title.
question about this too.
Sure.
So you're mentioning that this is a meta-analysis of studies
Yes.
on people who have detransitioned, but by definition, right, this is taking into account people who went through what? Puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, physical surgeries.
Sure, for in each study it was different things. In some of the studies it was people who were going through puberty blockers, some had hormone therapy, but a lot of them in one form or another had received gender affirming care. They were trans when the study first tried to identify these people, and then it looked at them years later.
And how is this sample collected? Because almost every single issue or almost every single study I've seen from trans advocates on this issue use a convenience sample rather than doing some kind of controlled randomized test for the treatment.
So this is a meta study of a whole bunch of other studies. So
Okay.
you would have to go between each study, because at the end of the day, I don't want to fall in this trap that me and Tim were about to do, where each of us starts saying like, well, I have a study. Well, you have a study. Well, I have a study. We could do this all day. So we should look at metadata, right? We should look at compromising data that looks over a whole bunch of studies. A second metadata study that I want you to look at, regret after gender affirming surgery, a systematic review and meta-analysis of prevalence. This went to Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, UK, Italy, USA, Brazil, Sweden, Singapore, Germany, Norway, Ireland, Serbia, and an interview between 27 studies, 7,928 trans patients. It showed a less than 1%
Right.
regret rate.
So
Can I also mention something? Desistance and detransition.
I have another meta study.
Okay, I got to address this right now. There is a problem we are facing in that you are saying a lot of things, and I can't pull up any sources. At the very least, all I did was Google searched it. I pulled up the 2 studies that were associated with it and said, here's what it says. I have not given you my personal perspective on it. You've now given me your personal view on it.
No, I've given you the studies. These are 2 meta studies.
What
I have a third meta
are
study.
the studies? Let me please pull them up. I can't find what you're talking about.
The first one is Cornell University. They did a meta study
What's
of
the name of it?
It's Cornell University's meta study of 72 studies on gender affirming care. Of that, 55 of the studies were directly related to detransitioning.
What meta study on?
I just want to flag that
What's the title?
desistance and
Title of the thing I can
detransitioning are
look up?
2 different things.
Right.
as well.
What?
Look up
Cornell University,
Cornell University. What does scholarly research say about the effect of gender transition or on gender trans well-being?
Oh, here we go. I found it.
Nice. And the third meta study that I want to bring up is a U.S. study. It's a 2015 U.S. transgender study.
But this isn't a scientific research paper that's peer reviewed.
No, this is a meta-analysis of scientifically researched papers.
Did you get that from what
Okay,
we
but-
know?
but-
Inequality.
But hold on, like, do we have a standard on why we should accept?
If you want to know their methodology, there's a click here to view the methodology thing. You can find that out for yourself right there.
But this is not a peer-reviewed scientific paper.
This is a meta-analysis, Tim,
Okay,
of
so I
peer-reviewed
reject
scientific
it.
papers.
I reject it outright.
Okay, so if you want to reject that outright,
Bro, next thing you're gonna do, you're gonna tell me ivermectin is some cure because of a
This has
meta-analysis.
nothing to do with it.
No, bro.
This has nothing to do with ivermectin.
You can't come to me when everyone tries screaming about ivermectin because of a meta-analysis that I reject and say I don't think it works.
You can go
and
to
then
the
have someone
We're
from
not
the
talking
left
about
come to
ivermectin.
me
We're not
and
talking
now
about
claim
ivermectin.
meta-analysis is effective. No, the point is this. I said give me a study and you cannot do it.
I am on my way to give you a third meta study, a
Those aren't
combination of
studies.
studies. These
Those
are
aren't studies.
No, if we go study to study
Okay,
back and
bro.
forth, Tim, this is going to take fucking forever.
Give me
So
one.
let's
Give
look
me one. One study. One. I'm giving you 2. Give me
No,
1.
This is embarrassing.
I've got like
Embarrassing. You
20
just can't
here.
give me one study?
Okay.
I'm giving you 2. And I didn't even make an assertion. I Googled it and pulled up what I
You
found.
want individual studies
I have
instead of
Googled-
meta-analysis, which is ridiculous, but sure, here's individual studies. The mental health outcomes in transgender non-binary youth receiving gender affirming care from February 25th, 2022. This shows
Let me type it in and pull it up for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, but I can explain to them while you're doing your own research. Kids who
I need
receive
you to
puberty
tell me what the name
blockers
is so I
and
can pull it up.
mental health outcomes in
Mental health
transgender
outcomes in
transgender and non-binary youth receiving gender affirming care, February 25th, 2022, peer-reviewed study. The findings, kids who receive puberty blockers and hormone therapy had 60% lower odds of moderate or severe depression and 73% lower odds of suicidality. Here's another individual study for you.
Hold on. That nothing to do with desistance.
Do you want to go back to desistance studies?
That's what I was asking you about. I Google search desistance. Wikipedia
Look
has
up-
2 studies that say it's 61 to 98%. You said that's wrong. I said, what's your source?
yes.
You didn't give me one.
I did on the spot.
You gave me a
It's okay. We're on
meta-analysis
camera, so
that is not
we don't get to go
peer-reviewed.
back.
It's not a peer-reviewed source.
Meta-analysis. If you want to go back and forth, Tim, on single studies, like I said, this can take forever. So it
Do you not have a single study?
I've named you tons of studies.
No. You've given me a meta-analysis, not a single
A
study.
meta-analysis combines other studies. Do you understand how that works?
Yes.
So of that, the
So what your
55 studies that it
argument
looks
is,
of the
is that
55
you've
studies
got
that it looked
72
at,
studies that have drawn a
52 of them
conclusion, and then
said
someone
that it
looked
is
at
less
them and
than
made a
4%,
different.
Tim.
You're saying that out of 72 studies that found a
No,
conclusion.
55. It
out
looked
of-
at 72. 55 talked about detransitioning.
It was a hypothetical number. I'm saying
51.
you're looking at
52, but yeah,
a bunch of studies that have come to conclusions
of course.
that are peer reviewed, and you're saying, but someone analyzed those.
Cornell
and
University did.
Who from Cornell?
Click here to view
Right,
our
right.
methodology, and you
This
can learn
is
about
the
their
point.
methodology. You just rejected it outright when you saw it. You were like,
Because
"Oh, I
it's not a
reject this
study.
outright."
It's not a
It's a
study.
meta-analysis of studies. These are different things. I'm
what you're-
explaining that
but
to you.
the problem is these studies have their own conclusions. You're ignoring.
They combine their conclusions to reach their findings.
Let me
That's how they do
explain
this.
for those that want to understand what I'm trying to say. During COVID, there were a whole bunch of studies done, individual studies, peer-reviewed, that found ivermectin did not work. The right kept bringing up meta-analyses that said, actually, it does. I said, and I said this to Joe Rogan, I reject that. Show me the actual study. I do not believe this is correct. I will not afford you some benefit to come in and make the same argument to me. If you do not have a study that is peer-reviewed and cited, then I'm not going to entertain your opinions.
So when I bring up the Cornell University study, that's
not a study, it's a meta-analysis.
Yeah, of 55 peer-reviewed studies, whose conclusion of 52 came to the fact that there is a less than 4% detransition rate. If you go to r/science, Tim, you can find out. No. This
Come
is,
on. I asked you for, you're pulling up Reddit when I'm
I'm pulling up Reddit because Cecilia, I believe her last name is pronounced Jen, explains and downplays why you're wrong about that 80 to 85% because she's the one who actually did that study. She's the one who did the study you cited. So she explains why it's being misused. It is not true.
I can say this. There are arguments about what is true all day, every day. There's arguments that M theory is wrong and that science is unwilling to give up because too many scientists have dedicated their lives to it. So they argue that M theory is the theory, while others are coming up with like E8 Lie group theory or whatever. I totally understand that people will decide what they think is true or not. Hence, I have a bottom line standard. If the right comes at me and says, ivermectin meta-analyses prove it works, I say, don't know, don't care. We have rejected the concept of someone analyzing a collection of studies and making a determination. What our standard is, or at the very least where I'm at is, if we're going to have any basic agreement on what is or isn't, there has to be a unified standard there, which is a peer-reviewed study, which is not absolute. If I have two peer-reviewed studies and the establishment narrative, when I search for it, says 61 to 98%, I will not accept your meta-analysis opinion the same as I wouldn't for someone who believes ivermectin works, because your argument is founded upon the same basis as theirs.
Okay, so first off, the meta-analysis of ivermectin actually showed that it wasn't effective at preventing or treating COVID-19. That was the actual meta-analysis on ivermectin, so it actually would back up your own claims. Secondly, you and me can look at individual studies, and it can take a very long time, but we should look at regret after gender-affirming surgery, a systematic review and meta-analysis of prevalence, which looks at, again, 27 studies and interviews 7,928 trans people across the world. And again, in places like Italy, USA, Brazil, you name it, that meta-analysis also found a less than 1% regret rate. You have to be able to combine multiple studies because this is something that has been so thoroughly investigated globally for so long that to ignore the science and data on this is to flagrantly...
There's not been a single large-scale randomized clinical trial for puberty blockers to treat gender dysphoria. There's not been one.
You all are very against Lupron, right?
Well, I don't know much about it.
I know.
mean,
I
saying
just
very against is pretty strong.
Okay.
I'm typically like, we shouldn't give...
I'm saying there hasn't been one large-scale randomized clinical trial for these
like
treatments.
Lupron for when children go through like the early onset puberty,
Yeah.
and it's like an actual medical issue. Like,
Yes, of course.
That's why saying very against something is like, well, what we're talking about is, are we going to a kid who are we dealing with an actual case of, say, endocrine disruption caused by phthalates in PCBs, or are we dealing with a kid who's just playing with dolls and the parents are incorrect, right?
And in that case, you would have a long process where they would have to do interviews with, again,
Except-
professionals who would determine
right.
whether or not it's appropriate. And people who go on puberty blockers, I
that's
want to add this,
fine,
if
but-
it's for a limited amount of time, they want to do it only to be able to
You're wrong.
hold that off. No, it isn't. If you
see,
speak
this
to
is-
the actual doctors on this,
this
you
is the
only
issue.
take it. No, Tim, let me finish the sentence. Come on. You brought me on your show. Let me finish this. You only go on puberty blockers for a short amount of time before you can be put onto HRT. They do not want to keep them on puberty blockers, and that way you avoid a lot of the potential negative side effects
We
from
had
that.
Helena Kirshner on the show, who walked into a Planned Parenthood and within minutes was given the maximum dose of testosterone.
Anecdote.
Absolutely.
Lived
So when I say lived experience
anecdote.
happens, you say it doesn't happen. I'm saying it did happen.
No, I'm saying it can happen.
And
I'm saying you have to look at broader data. You have to look at broader
that's
trends.
the issue I take, right?
Yeah, and it wouldn't make sense if I brought up a single horror story to you and said, this is fact. It can happen.
I said we don't want that to happen.
Of course, no one wants that to happen. But then
so
if
it
we want to understand how this is actually taking place around the world from an actual perspective of science, we have to look at the data. We have to look at meta-studies. We have to look at and analyze global understanding of this. When it comes to Lupron, by example, yes, it's true that Lupron is not FDA approved for the use of on cisgender children. There is a product that is FDA approved for use with children that is a puberty blocker, and it has been used for a long time, for generations and decades. It's Lupron. It was just being done.
No, but that's for an entirely different reason. That's for an entirely different reason. So to say we want to prevent a child from undergoing early onset puberty so that they can develop at a normal, healthy rate is entirely different. It is entirely different from saying we're going to administer puberty blockers because this child feels they're a member of the opposite sex.
But
that's an entirely different reason.
Whether or not it's
because you're looking for a different
is going to be the problem, right? You want to know whether or not its use is going to be dangerous on children.
And the reason for administering a certain treatment can render it dangerous. So, for example, if we have been amputating people's limbs for hundreds of years, if I go into a doctor and say, please cut my arm off because I don't want it anymore, and he cuts my arm off, that's medical malpractice. For you to jump in and go, we've been cutting people's arms off for hundreds of years. This is medically approved. People are allowed to do this.
Can I answer this?
Is not, yes, absolutely.
So what you're describing is called BIID, body identity disorder. I forget how it's spelled. It is a real phenomenon.
Dysmorphic.
It's extremely rare, but we know enough about it at this point to know that people will seek out to get operations on the black market if they have BIID. And what we found when people do that and go to the black market to have a limb removed is that it only provides a temporary amount of relief for their condition, and then it returns and they have further complications from the fact that they now have a disability and or medical complications that come from all that.
My point is not about any kind of body dysmorphia about losing a limb. My point is about drawing a false conclusion by a medical treatment being allowed under circumstance A but not being allowed under circumstance B. You're saying we allow it for kids who have hit precocious puberty, but then we don't allow it for kids who don't want to go through puberty because they want to be a member of the opposite sex.
It's still not FDA approved. That's different.
But you understand my point. You can't claim those things are the same.
I just Google searched it real quick. Stat in 2017, 100 out of 100 with NewsGuard. Drug use to halt puberty may cause lasting health problems. More than 10,000 adverse event reports were filed with the FDA, reflecting the experience of women who've taken Lupron, describing everything from brittle bones to faulty joints.
Regarding meta-analyses,
I'm worried about, giving kids things on an experimental basis.
Yeah, this is a huge, long conversation, and it would be so awesome to go through each study. I would love to. It would probably take like 7 hours, 6 hours, but we could do it, but like not tonight, unfortunately.
Well, so let me ask you
but I want to keep down this path because I think we're making good progress.
Let me ask you a question, right? Like Jazz Jennings is sterile, right?
I don't know much about Jazz Jennings.
Jazz Jennings,
she's a reality TV star, right?
Jazz Jennings.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that Jazz isn't trans. Because
that's not for us to say.
I didn't say. I said I'm concerned that Jazz is not trans, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason is Jazz is dating women now, right? So then Jazz would.
What does that have to do with being trans?
Well, Jazz would then be a biological male dating women at the age of 23.
What does that have to do with being trans?
So it has to do with whether or not Jazz made the decision for themselves or the parent made it when they were 3 years old. So the question is, we want to avoid a John Money type situation, right? Where you had these two kids and the doctor told one of the young boys he was actually a girl and then forced him to live as a girl, ultimately resulting in his suicide and then the death of the brother as well. We don't want that to happen. And so that did happen already, and we know that happened. So we have to be careful about taking a 3-year-old and then raising them and telling them they're female, because then if they start exhibiting traditional, gender behaviors, there may be some concern. For instance, Jazz stopped dilating. And that was the big controversy over the past few weeks, the mother going on TV saying she would force Jazz to do it. If Jazz is saying, I'm not gonna, and the mother saying, do it or I'll wring your neck, which is a quote, and then Jazz is not dating women, we're starting to see a pattern that may be concerning because it follows the John Money situation. Whether or not Jazz is trans or not, my concern is, what if? And that means there may be children who are going to be pushed down a path that ultimately leads to their suicide because their parents can't make the decision for them, but they did.
So the data overwhelmingly shows that if you give children gender-affirming care, especially if you have loving and accepting parents who accept children's actual gender identity, it reduces the rates of suicide dramatically. In the case of a parent who affirms their child's gender, it can reduce suicide rates of up to 93% in some studies. It's not a case of more often than not, these are children who are approaching their parents saying they think this is something happening to them, and parents pushing back and being like, no, this is wrong. You're just a tomboy. Oh, this is, this is not you. This is blah, blah, blah. And you don't go into a doctor and all of a sudden they're like, here's Lupron.
They do.
No, but they don't, Tim. The average
like,
amount of
hold
time...
on.
The average amount of time.
You can't say they don't when we've had the anecdotes. They do. Call it an anecdote.
It's an
I'm
anecdote.
telling you, it does happen.
Of course, but that's an anecdote. We have to look at
So
data,
don't say
science,
it doesn't
statistics.
happen.
Well, it happens, but that doesn't mean it's
Then
a
say
broad
it should
trend.
not happen.
Right, but that's okay. This is asinine. We have to talk about what actually occurs via the numbers, right? That's what matters. Like I have here the largest U.S. transgender survey ever done. It's in 2015 to 21,598 participants, and this covers people in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and it has all the results you're looking for.
So let me ask you a question. Why do you think we're seeing the a rapid increase in the past few years?
I can explain that as well.
Of young people identifying as trans.
Okay, can I answer that?
Can you
afterwards?
read the study,
Yeah,
please?
of course. So it shows the 2015 U.S. transgender survey of 21,598 participants that with hormone therapy, psychological distress for children reduces by 222%, late adolescence 153%, adulthood 81%, suicidal ideation for children goes down 135%, for adolescents 62%, and for adults 21%. That is dramatic.
Is this
That
the
is stunning.
Stanford Medical School survey analysis done by Jack Turbin?
I don't know the person
Okay.
who did it. Let me
Okay.
pull it up. But in terms of the increase, Tim, of people,
Because there was a study done by Stanford Medical School that very closely fits the description of what you've just read out there, which is very ascientific and with
Well,
data that is
I-
collected
I-
poorly.
I-
Yeah, so just please find
You
the
can
source
say
of
that.
that because
My-
I want to pull that apart,
yeah,
but I
of
want to
course,
be
sure.
sure that I know
appreciate
you're
it.
talking about that
Yeah.
study.
I'm curious as to why you think it's increasing so much.
What's that signify?
The history of left-handedness.
this is the history of left-handedness in the United States. Do you see what happens here?
It levels out. It goes
Jumps
up and levels
in the
out.
levels.
We used to treat people who were left-handed as satanic, as the devil, all that kind of shit. You remember that, right? And that's why there was a lot of people who didn't record themselves as being left-handed. And then boom, when we stopped doing that after the 1880s and in the 1900s, it spiked. Now this spike isn't because there was a whole bunch of indoctrination or Alex Jones was like, oh, left-handed ideology, everyone has become left-handed. This has nothing to do with that. This is naturally how many left-handed people there were. And then it plateaued. We are in a situation right now where it is safer than ever for people to come out and if they're queer, bisexual, whatever it is, and because of that, they feel safer expressing that. That's why Gen
Oh, wow.
Z of all
I was concerned there was a
generations-
transgenocide.
Yeah, so here's
This is the actual statistics on people increasing. You can see the red one. That is Gen Z. That is the amount of people who in Gen Z, it's skyrocketing. It looks
So-
like they're
so-
identifying more than ever because their generation feels more comfortable talking about this kind of stuff.
So you don't
more
think that
media
there's
about
like
it.
a transgenocide or anything like that?
I don't think that there's a trans indoctrination that is coming through media.
Genocide, I said.
Yes, and I'm saying that I don't think there's a trans indoctrination coming through media that is programming kids to become trans. I think that's ridiculous. And if you want to change topics to talk about trans genocide, we can move on to that. But
is it- is it-
you
is it-
asked me specifically why
Right,
is there a spike?
Yeah.
That is why.
Okay, so my follow-up is, you think trans people feel safer than ever?
No, right now there's over 400 different bills being pushed in the United States that is directly targeting trans people.
So they don't feel safe.
Of course they don't.
So then why are they coming out if they don't feel safe?
They have more access because that Generation Z, has a lot more acceptance towards trans people than older people who pass laws, draconian people who pass laws. The boomers are the ones running the show right now. They're still the ones in government. They're still the ones passing laws. There's very few Generation Z in government or parliament.
You want to know what I think? I think there is a transgenocide.
Okay.
And I think it's you,
Okay.
because you're sterilizing a lot of these people.
How so?
I mean, they're literally sterilizing them. The surgery to remove the gonads, hysterectomies, and puberty and cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers have a high rate of sterilization. I mean, first of all, removal of the gonads in the uterus is an absolute sterilization, and then puberty blockers have a very high rate, and cross-sex hormones have an extremely high rate of sterilizing the individual. So these people can no longer reproduce. That's genocide.
Is this the joke you're going to go for?
Joke? You are removing these people's ability to reproduce. And if they're a young age and they haven't had the ability, like for instance, Jazz Jennings can never have kids. Jazz Jennings also, and this probably part of your studies, can't actually feel any sexual feeling of any kind.
Do you have any idea how weird this sounds right now? Like, why are you obsessing with a stranger's genital pleasure? That's so weird. That's so bizarre.
That was very weird yourself.
You guys
the one
are
who just
all
brought that
weird.
up.
No.
So I'm
just
talking
brought this
about
up.
adults who engage in activities, which is a large portion of the global economy, whether you like it or not. Sex sells, they say. And when I say this person will never have this ability, you go, how weird is that?
It's weird for you to fixate on a stranger's genital pleasure. That's strange. That's so bizarre.
Well,
Like,
she's
why-
public about it.
But see,
why.
you're not making an argument right now, is my point.
I'm not. I'm saying it's weird. It's not an argument.
Yeah,
I'm just
that's-
that's an observation.
So you're trying to make an appeal to emotion and an appeal to
No,
shame.
I'm just giving you my genuine thought when you say something like that. Like,
well,
why should
that it
we-
was a really fucking pathetic attempt at trying
Why
to make
should
an
we
argument.
talk about that? Why should we discuss whether or not she has genital feeling? That's not important. It's not. It's not in my business.
So let's focus then on the sterilizing of the individual. Are you okay with that?
Who's sterilizing people?
Jazz Jennings is sterile.
Why are we going back to Jazz Jennings? I don't
Because Jazz
I don't know
Jennings is
anything
famous.
about her.
Because Jazz is a famous individual on cable television.
So if she is sterile for whatever reason, what does that have to do with me? Why does that concern me? Why
Do you
should I pass
support
legislation?
the sterilization of teenagers?
This is such a weird way to frame this. Like,
You are removing teenagers' ability to have children.
I'm not doing anything. I'm not a doctor, Tim.
You
I don't have the
support
ability
it,
to do this.
right?
I support people having access to health care. Of course. Why would I want to prevent that just because some
you
people have
agree-
bigotry towards them?
Let's try again. You seem scared of this. Do you believe that parents and doctors should have the ability to remove the ability of a child for future reproduction?
They should have the ability to give them access to health care. Of course they should.
So why do you keep saying it like that?
You're implying that every single gender affirming care results in sterilization.
didn't say that.
That is not true at all.
I said the removal
There's
of
also
the-
people who are trans that never get bottom surgery.
You seem very scared of this. It's scaring you
How am I afraid to?
because you keep deflecting when I ask you. So Jazz Jennings is a specific
Deflecting.
example. Let's try this.
Tim,
Let's slow down and go one point at a time.
You
right?
think I'm deflecting because I don't want to keep talking about someone's genital pleasure who's a stranger.
Nice
I'm saying
try.
I'm
Nice
saying
try.
it shouldn't concern
Nice
you.
try.
It shouldn't concern
Nice try.
anyone, Tim.
Your
That's-
appeal to emotion is not going to work on me. I'm asking you a science.
I know I can appeal to your emotion.
I'm trying a logic-based question about the future of these people. I believe you are genociding them. I believe you intend on genociding autistic individuals. I genuinely believe that.
Who's autistic in this?
A large portion of trans kids are autistic, namely females. So this is an issue in that young lesbian autistic females are a large portion of those who are transgender.
Do you have data on this?
I mean, come on, bro. Do you have data on what you've brought up? You couldn't give me one study, but yes, I'll pull it
I've
up
given
for
you not only studies, meta
pull it up for
studies.
you.
I've given you multiple meta studies on this. I've given you a surplus of information on this topic.
Make up six times more likely to have autism, according to NPR.org. So I think you're trying to genocide autistic people. I literally
So
I
six
don't-
times more.
you-
What's the percentage of? That's what I asked you.
6 times 60%.
That's not how that works. That's not. You don't.
600. Sorry,
No, that's not how that works.
you're
either.
saying what percent of them?
What percentage
are
of trans people happen to be autistic lesbians? That was your claim, that a large portion are. I'm saying I don't know any statistics on that. I've never heard that before.
So the first thing I pulled up was that transgender and non-binary people are up to 6 times more likely to have autism. Right.
Right, but that's not answering the question yet.
And your question is what portion of? Let me Google it again. Because I thought that was sufficient in 24%,
So that's not the majority, even if that stat is true.
6 times more common, 24%.
That's still not the majority, even if that statistic was true.
Yeah, no, that the majority is.
So 24% of trans people are autistic according to that data, and 6% of.
So what I think is, I think that there are people who hate people with Down syndrome, and in Iceland, they've actually publicly avowed or praised their eradication of people with Down syndrome. I think that's horrifying. Like you can be okay with it. I'm not saying you're not allowed to believe that, right? You don't have to have the same morals as me. I just think it's wrong to genocide like people with Down syndrome. You know what I mean?
You have completely derailed this conversation. You're assuming that I'm pro people having abortions for people who have Down syndrome when we're talking about.
I'm not saying you do. I'm saying in
Okay.
Iceland, they've
What does
stated
this have to do with trans rights?
Right. So we see a higher rate of autistic people, autism in trans kids.
You said it makes it the majority. It does not, even based on the source you pulled up. Okay.
24%.
Okay.
I still believe that this is very much an effort. I think the left is intent on genociding trans people,
In what way?
removing their ability to reproduce
How are they removing their ability
by
to reproduce?
cutting off
Tim?
their testicles and removing their
That is
uteruses.
not the only operation that is done. There are
No.
trans people who maintain their same genitals as before. Not
Right.
everyone has to decide to get bottom surgery. That's a choice they should make.
And cross-sex hormones do have a high rate of causing sterilization.
It can, but it doesn't always. And you
Also,
can be
like-
trans and not
Sure.
get any operations at all.
So I think you are So like I'm in favor of making sure these people can always have families and have kids, right? Your position, whether you support the moral issue of or not, results in many of them being sterile. For instance, the reason I use Jazz Jennings as an example, because this is a person on television with millions of followers who wrote a book and told kids about this journey. The journey that Jazz Jennings went on resulted in a complete inability to have a family and have children. I think that's terrifying because Jazz was not old enough to understand the implications of that. Jazz will never have a family. Jazz, the genetics of Jazz Jennings is over. That is one of the most horrifying things to me as a human being, because I think genocide is wrong, right?
Why should her ability to be or have reproductive function, why should that concern you?
For the same reason the Uyghur Muslims in China concern me, like human rights issues. China, for instance,
But what if she never wants to have kids?
That's something you determine for yourself later in life.
Exactly.
after
So why
going
is it
through
our business?
Because it's been removed before Jazz could have the ability
But
to
again,
make the conclusion.
that has nothing to do with us. She could decide to never want to have kids, and that's fine and valid.
Right. So my morals would be that a society protects the children because there's certain things you can't know until you're at least 24 or older when your brain is fully developed, which is why we don't allow people to drink and do certain drugs, whatever drugs are legal, until they're 21. So for me, I'm like, if you can't drink till you're 21, if there's like you can't smoke till you're 18, this society absolutely recognizes you can't drive till a certain age. That the reason that the driving age is what it is. One of the arguments made, I think it was in Illinois, is that risk taking is a lot higher in youth than it is in older people. So the argument is once you're past 16, you go through driver's ed. That helps control for the higher risk taking of younger people. So we set an age limit. For someone who's 10 years old to be put on Lupron and then cross-sex hormones, they will never develop the ability to reproduce. So in the instance of Jazz, again, a famous individual who's very influential with millions of followers, there was never the ability to reproduce developed, which caused complications. Complications aside, that's Jazz's personal business. But the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones did sterilize Jazz, 100% sterilization. Jazz was not old enough to understand the implications of that. So I have concerns about having children, whether they choose to or their parents choose to. I think that's genocide.
I can kind of see your argument, because if a kid was a straight kid, just a kid, and they were like a 12-year-old girl, and she was like, I don't want to have babies when I'm older. And the mom was like, okay, then we'll sterilize you right now. And they went and had the kid had a hysterectomy. I think that's illegal. I don't know, but I would imagine society needs to protect little kids from crazy parents that are like, just because a 12-year-old says they don't have babies later in life. So the fact that it is sterilizing as a byproduct, I think should be taken into account with the whole procedure.
I think that's still something that comes down to the individual and what they choose to do. And if someone is like, I want to have gender affirming care, knowing the risks, then why is that my business? It's the same thing with someone who wants to have a surgery that can have other complications. That's not my business. If someone had an appendix inflamed and they had to have their appendix out, there are potential complications that come from that, but I'm not going to prevent them from having healthcare and saying that you can't have a right to get your appendix out, because every major medical association in the United States agrees that that is the best way to treat appendicitis. And in this case, when we're talking about trans people, every single medical association in the United States agrees on gender affirming care.
Then you know what they should do?
Every single one.
You know what they should do? They should produce one single randomized controlled trial for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to show that it's safe and effective. But they have not. So it's not healthcare, it's experimentation. You talk about giving kids healthcare. That's not healthcare. Healthcare repairs something which is broken. You use the example of somebody's appendix not functioning properly.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, yes. So what you have to do in that instance is intervene so that the body can function as it is intended to. Destroying somebody's ability to procreate is demolishing the organ that you're claiming to treat, right? You're destroying the biological function rather than helping to improve it. That's not healthcare.
I want to pull this up too. This is from University of Utah, because I was reading about this recently. It goes on to mention that hormone replacement therapy can make you sterile, and that it's important.
It can.
It's important to preserve your sperm. It says if you're trans feminine, otherwise the hormone therapy may make it impossible for you to have biological children. If someone is put on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones as a child, they will never have the ability to preserve their reproductive functions.
So if you're put on puberty blockers, they are reversible. You can stop being on puberty blockers and you can still maintain a lot of things that you were worried about being taken away. When it comes to Jazz Jennings specifically, she's actually made statements about this because, I was just looking this up. Jazz Jennings says, I don't regret my transition at all. When I was 11, I started male puberty and I was put on hormone blockers. Those blockers saved my life and continued to save the lives of so many youth out there. If I was forced to go through male puberty, it would have been devastating. Even more so, taking estrogen through hormone replacement allowed my body to develop how I wanted. I blossomed into a young woman, eventually got bottom surgery, and now living as a proud woman today. What does that have to do with me? Why would I want to take that away from someone else?
What year did she make that statement?
She made this on March 31st.
She made it recently because that video came out where the mom said she was going to force the dilator.
And then Matt
into
Walsh
Jazz.
went hard, and Jazz was like, "Hey, Matt," and then Matt was like, "Sorry, Jazz."
There's a lot of questions around the morality of this. The left likes to defer instantly to purity arguments, which I find fascinating, considering the left typically has a low purity rating when it comes to moral foundations. For example, when you said it's really weird talking about someone's genitals, it's a purity argument, which the left typically never makes. That's why I said it's a very weird thing for you to do. Approaching this from an academic perspective, we would make a few arguments about whether or not a person can truly understand they've lost the ability to reproduce if they've never had it in the first place, the psychological and the philosophical implications of stripping away a person's ability to reproduce before they were old enough to even know what that was. So, for example, if you take an adult human, female or male, and remove their genitals by force, they will be very, very upset. Extremely upset. In fact, it's a form of torture in a lot of countries. It's meant to terrify. If you took away their ability to feel sexual satisfaction, it's a form of torture. In fact, female circumcision is horrifying to the world. And it actually was huge controversies up in Dearborn, Michigan, because what it would do is it would result in women who are as adults could not feel anything and they were effectively used as like objects for their husbands. So in making an academic argument, we would say, Jazz Jennings does not understand, and that's fine if Jazz is happy. That's great. The argument into the greater is Jazz will never have kids. Fact statement. I think it's wrong to take away that from someone who doesn't understand what it is.
What if they don't want kikids?
They will decide that when they're an adult and have assessed the circumstances. But Jazz can't actually feel any of this. Jazz can't feel. This was a study. There's a doctor who came out, did a Zoom video on it, specifically, I think, referring to Jazz, that Jazz will never experience any adult satisfaction or desire. And so the question then becomes, why did Jazz get bottom surgery? My question, why do you think Jazz got bottom surgery?
Oh, I don't have to ask that. She explained why. She said that she's satisfied with it. That should be the extent of it.
What did she say?
I don't regret my transition at all. When I was 11, I started male puberty and I was put on hormone blockers. Those blockers saved my life and continue to save the lives of so many youth out there. If I was forced to go through male puberty, it would have been devastating. Even more, taking estrogen through hormone replacement allowed my body to develop how I wanted. I blossomed into a young woman, eventually got bottom surgery, and I'm living as a proud woman today. Yes, I do struggle with mental health and always have, but it's not because I transitioned, and it's unfortunately something many LGBTQ plus people face. Why? Because it has a lot to do with hate and a lack of acceptance that we receive in society, like I was saying before. So to all of you speaking about our mental health reviews and calling our families abusers for supporting our transition, you are the only abusers.
So what was the purpose of the bottom surgery?
It affirmed her gender.
Of anyone.
It affirmed her gender.
What does that mean, affirmed gender?
So you have, and all of us have, a gender identity that we want to express in one way or another. And with hers, she affirmed her gender through the process of getting bottom surgery to look more and feel more like a woman.
Why do you think Jazz stopped dilating?
I don't know.
Probably because it hurt.
But if this was an important part of affirmation, you'd think Jazz would maintain it.
That's not for me to decide. That's someone else's own identity.
So
again, that's why it's weird to me to try and impose this upon someone else. Like to try and say like you're disgusted at the fact that she can't have kids or something like that. It's like, I don't know if she ever wants kids because I don't know who she is, but that's a decision for her to make between her and her doctor. Has nothing to do with me.
Why would any trans child get a bottom surgery?
Again, to affirm their gender.
So
as part of gender affirming care.
Why
children don't get bottom surgery, by the way. It's usually over 18.
Well, Jazz was 17.
Yeah.
Right, and so there are exceptions,
and
yes, but average age is over 18.
Was
like Boston's Children's Hospital has never done that on anyone under the age of 18. The average age for bottom surgery is over 18 years old.
So
overwhelmingly.
Why would I just don't understand why the it's not penile inversion vaginoplasty. I don't know what it's called because Jazz didn't have a penis. What's the purpose of making the hole, the space? What's the purpose of that?
The operation is because it gives them it affirms their gender through the process of having a similar genitalia to a cis woman.
So what's the purpose of it?
I just explained that.
So the purpose of it is just feeling, just emotion.
No, the purpose of it is part of affirming who they are through a surgery that makes them look and feel more like a version of a woman that they want to be. You don't have to. There's not a template. That's not the only version a woman can be. There's other versions of how a woman can be and look, but that's the version that she wanted.
So what I'm trying to understand is, why create a permanent wound for the purpose of a man to have sex with in order to affirm the identity of someone who can't feel any of that?
Well, first off, I have no idea about the actual sensations that people experience after these kind of surgeries, but that's not my business. And the second thing would be, I don't believe it's a wound. I believe it's an operation to have a genital change. That's it. To describe it as a wound is just very crude.
But it's factually a wound, right? I'm trying to avoid the right calls it a mutilation or an abomination. I'm not saying that.
But it's still crude to just call it a wound. After it's healed, I'm sure there's no more wounds or scars or anything.
They have to dilate for the rest of their lives because it is a wound. Like, I'm being academic. I'm not trying to be insulting to anybody. The right calls it mutilation and abomination. The reason they have to use dilators for the rest of their lives is because it is factually a wound.
But you're asking me a question that I can't answer because I'm not this individual. I don't know why someone would want to get that surgery because I'm cis and I don't experience these kind of things. But if someone wants to, but Tim, if someone wants to and it makes them feel better and improves their quality of life, then why do we have to get in the way of that?
Well, can I interject
so
here?
My position is, for adults, I agree. And I had the argument with Tom Fitton. He said it should be banned outright. So I disagree.
But overwhelmingly, when you look at the data, when it happens to children, it improves their psychological distress. It removes and lowers suicidal ideation. It shows in the data that it helps them.
That's not true, man. So the studies you have here, the study you have here, the largest one. So first of all, as I mentioned, there have been no controlled randomized trial, but the largest study you cited there, the largest study that you cited there does not say what you think it says. The Stanford University one, it was 27,000 people who were surveyed in 2015, and then there were 2 analyses done of these studies by Jack Turbin, and he lumped data together and did a few manipulative things to get the results he wanted. But there's 2 very important things to mention, which is, firstly, this study was based on convenience sampling. So they were speaking with people who were sent to them by LGBTQ advocacy groups and groups that they reached out to. So you're already not getting an unbiased population sample there. And then they were determining whether that person received puberty blockers and other such treatments or hadn't, but they didn't go over the reasons. In fact, the people who hadn't received puberty blockers or those kinds of treatments didn't receive them because they weren't allowed to. And one of the requirements for being able to receive that kind of treatment is some level of psychological stability, which means the people who weren't on puberty blockers in that study were more likely to be psychologically unstable, which we would expect to produce a higher suicide rate, but that wasn't controlled for. On top of that, the data actually shows that the men who are on estrogen were more likely to become suicidal. But what he ended up doing, that's true, what he ended up doing was lumping them together. So he said people on cross-sex hormones are less likely to commit suicide because, according to the sample he had of women, that was true enough to overcompensate for the increased likelihood of suicidality in the men. And he just threw them all together as if a man taking estrogen is the same thing as a woman taking testosterone, and we could expect the same medical outcomes. And I'm saying that's bullshit.
So to respond to you, I do have a number of peer-reviewed studies related to this.
And if they're as good as that one, I'm telling you, they're trash.
Mental health outcomes in transgender non-binary youth receiving gender-affirming care. February 25th, 2022. This one shows kids who receive puberty blockers and hormone therapy had 60% lower odds of moderate or severe depression, 73% lower odds of suicidality. Gender identity 5 years after social transition. This one is in the American Academy of Pediatrics, peer-reviewed, July 13th, 2022. Between 317 youth, they found 94% binary transgender stayed the same. Only 2.5% reverting as cisgender, 3.5% as non-binary trans. A UK 2019 study of 3,398 people who had gender-affirming care found that only 0.47% regretted it. Another one, the impacts of strong parental support for trans youth, found that parents who support trans youth, this was 433 participants, double-blind study, 93% reduction in reported suicides.
So hold
on, and I think we can all have the good faith that you did as much work fact-checking those studies as you did the one I just tore apart, but I didn't have time to go into every single bit of statistical information you would bring here.
This is the problem with, like you mentioned, going to studies back and forth or whatever. So that's why I'm fine with, I'm not here to change your morals, right?
Oh, I know.
And that's fine. So my question would just be, why do you think it is that in Europe they've abandoned these practices?
A lot of it was political. If you look at the history of it, especially when it came to puberty blockers and how that was handled, it was in large part a political decision that both medical groups, advocates, as well as pro-LGBTQ organizations outwardly protested, and especially like I know you're going to bring up Finland. I believe was one of the countries that did it. Sweden as well. And,
The UK.
Yeah, and in a number of cases,
Denmark, I think.
this is something in which experts in the fields of endocrinology, pediatrics, they were very opposed to it. It was politicians who were pushing for this, and so this was a political decision. This is why I don't like when politics get directly involved in medical decisions, because I mean, like you were saying, if you want to look up the actual organizations that support this, it's every major medical association in the United States, everyone without fail.
But they're for profit. A lot of times, if you don't get politically involved in the medical industry, they'll experiment on humans for money.
And also,
some of them are,
fair,
some of them are not. If I listed them to you right now, because I have the list, some of these are not for-profit institutions just looking to make a fucking buck. Some of these are just genuinely concerned about child health care.
And some of them have various, ideological biases. This isn't always about money all the time. But if you're going to reject what Tim is saying about medical institutions no longer performing these operations in Nordic Europe because you're claiming those institutions have become political, I don't know how you could give any credibility to the American ones.
So it's not the medical...
Do you think the American model of practicing medicine is better than the model in Nordic Europe?
Let me answer your question.
Okay.
It's not the organizations themselves that have done it distinctly. It was politicians and political organizations as well as think tanks that were pushing for it. And it was a lot of experts in the field that directly wanted it not to happen, that were fighting against it.
But then why is it the case that the nation that started doing this earlier than any of the others was the Netherlands? They started around 1990 administering puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for children who purported to be struggling with feelings of dysphoria. And so they have some of the longest term data available on this. And what they found is that transitioning has no effect on suicidality.
That's part of the studies that I'm interested in, is the suicide stuff. Like in 2022, they measured a bunch of people that transitioned. They were suicidal. They transitioned. Now they're not. But it's like, hey, that was 8 months ago. Like, how are you going to feel in 4 years from now? So it's hard to say like now they're no longer suicidal just because they're like, yeah, I'm not suicidal now. But like we need long-term studies.
We do need to go to super chats because we're way past. But I do want to ask another just question. Like, do you think the Earth is overpopulated?
No, I don't.
You don't think so?
No, I want more people. I love people. I want more birth. I want more humans. I love everybody, man. I want more people on this planet.
But what about climate change?
Climate change is coming. It's real. It's happening right now.
But I mean,
but you're not Malthusian then.
No, I'm not.
Yeah,
okay.
But more people means more climate change. You got more mouths to feed. You got
true.
more fuels to burn.
But more orgasms.
It would also means more scientists figuring out how to cure the carbon problem.
That was kind of weird, right?
More humans doesn't necessarily mean more climate change, because more humans might figure out better ways to balance out the climate.
I'll just say one last thing, and we'll go to super chats, and then I guess I want to try and get to the members only port. Actually, man, I feel bad for going long. We should go to the members portion so we can do audience Q&A and stuff.
There's some big super chats in here.
I'll try and grab as many as I can, and then we'll try to we'll go straight to Q&A for the members only portion. But my attitude is I'm not a conservative. I'm pro-choice. I think I've got my morality, but in the long term, I really don't care that leftists are sterilizing and aborting their children.
I thought you did care.
From a moral position, but like, I'm not a conservative like Seamus, where Seamus is very much like, we have to end this because it's wrong. I'm not a conservative. If a woman is going to get an abortion at a certain age, I'm like, I disagree with it, but I'm more libertarian in the respect of like, people can choose to do what they want to do. I think it's certainly wrong to sterilize kids, but the end result is the future is going to be a bunch of Christian conservatives and Muslims.
And
so
Jews.
like it's a self.
And Mormonism.
Yes, but the Jewish population, the diaspora is like 12 million, and Christians and Muslims are billions. Yeah. So like,
but that's happened in Israel, right? Where the more religious Jews have more children, and so they're dominating elections.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so we saw this since the year 2000. Liberals have been effectively shrinking. Gen Z is the first generation in 100 years to slightly move towards conservative in some areas. Likely not because Gen Z is becoming conservative, but because there's less liberal Gen Zers than there are conservative ones. So the end result of all of this is just like, look, man, I'm not going to convince you to vote the way I would vote. I'm not going to convince Seamus to vote that way I would vote. But it doesn't matter anyway, because in 100 years, you guys are sterilizing and aborting your kids. End of story.
Wait a minute, not you.
Well, yeah, I'm saying from the political.
He's
left,
saying,
center,
he's saying
right.
I represent the left to him.
Do you? Do you feel like you represent
He
the
called
left?
himself a leftist.
I don't feel I represent the left. No.
Well, you called yourself a leftist.
But I'm a proud leftist. I wear that. I don't have to hide that. I don't hide my power levels. I don't wear some kind of like hidden power.
My point is just this, right?
I'm just saying I'm like there's no single voice for the left. I'm not the voice of the left.
No, sure. I'm just saying the left will cease to exist. And the middle and the right will supplant it, and then the middle will become the left, and the right will stay the right.
Here's what I'll say, is that LGBTQ plus people were heavily persecuted by a lot of different groups, including the Nazis at one point or another in history, and you just can't get rid of them.
And the communists.
If you and the communists.
Yeah,
and if you were to get
Che
rid
Guevara,
of
man.
every single queer, if you got rid of every single gay, every single lesbian, every single bisexual, every single trans person, if you got rid of all of them in a generation or two, they would reappear because they're a part of us. They're a part of humanity. They're a part of all of us. They just exist. They are a part of the human experience.
Yeah, but I think that chart you showed with the left-handed thing.
Yeah.
If Christians and Muslims start dominating, they're going to be repressed, right? So the idea is it's like basic math. We saw this in 2000. Liberals were having 1.45 kids and conservatives having 2.01 kids. So conservatives were at replacement levels and liberals weren't. 20 years later, we see slightly more, for the first time ever, conservative Gen Zers in some areas. Gen Z is about, according to Pew, as progressive as millennials. In some areas, are a little bit more progressive. In some areas, are a little bit more conservative, which is shocking because every generation was skewing more progressive. This is likely due to the fact, not, like I said, not that children were like, I'm conservative now, but conservatives had more kids. So it really doesn't matter what your position is if your position is less kids for the left and more kids for the right.
So you think transgender people should have more kids?
I would love it if trans people and LGBT people had children and families. That's my personal morality. But the end result is there is one faction that is pro-abortion, unrestricted, and in favor of practices which result in a substantial rate of sterilization for children. Conservatives, be it Muslim or Christian or Jewish, don't do these things. And so the future is very obviously going to be an Abrahamic conservative country.
Yeah, but we need a more scientific religion in the future. This is another 2-hour conversation, maybe.
Let's read some super chats, and then we'll try to get the members only Q&A straight to the Q&A, and I'll try and find some good super chat questions just to make sure. Carly says, as a woman who's had an abortion and given birth later in life, this man needs to do some research, but he sure has some balls for having this conversation on TIMCAST. Well, I respect it, absolutely. I thought it was a good conversation.
The Serfs TV. Lance. Yeah, what is it? YouTube.com/the Serfs TV?
Yeah, everywhere social media is sold at the Serfs TV if you want to hear my musings. And I will add that while I do distinctly disagree with most of the takes of the people on this panel, they've been very friendly and very nice to me. And they put me in a nice hotel. And Ian is just as friendly in real life as everyone, led him to believe.
I'm going to the moon with you, dude.
Let me. Here's one from Marby Doug. He says, please ask your guest if he feels the same about bodily autonomy with regards to the vaccines.
Yeah, I think you should have the right whether or not you want to take the vaccine.
So you would disagree with the vaccine mandate?
A forcible vaccine mandate? I mean, for the purposes of freedom, yes, but it sucks. That's one of those, like, it sucks, but of course, I don't think people should be forced to have to take a jab against their will.
Like if the government said in order to go to school...
like a government mandated vaccine program, I disagree with, in that like every single human being is like strapped down and like, oh, I don't want to take it, but you have to, kind of thing.
But you would be okay with like every facet of society saying we require vaccines?
Oh, when there was a vaccination, like, what was the word for it? Like a segregation of people who were vaccinated and unvaccinated.
Well, like, you oppose the government holding you down and vaccinating you.
Yes, I think you should have a choice whether or not you should do that, but other people should have a choice whether or not they get sick from you because you didn't vaccinate yourself.
Do you think the government should be allowed to mandate vaccines for public accommodation?
Yeah, for certain things, of course. Like, we already do that for hospitals. You have to be vaccinated if you're a nurse or a doctor against a host of different things for obvious medical reasons, and I think that serves an important purpose.
So...
Same thing with the military. The military is mandatory vaccination for the same reasons.
But so your line is bodily autonomy, but not participation in society.
Well, you can choose whether or not to be a doctor. You can choose whether or not to be in the military.
Well, I mean, like going to a cafe or a movie or something, right?
Well, yeah, but I'm saying that there are certain things where it makes sense from a scientific standpoint, where, like, if you're a doctor or nurse, yeah, that probably is something that you should be vaccinated for. It depends if that is directly going to have an impact on the broader society if people get sick writ large.
But that means no bodily autonomy.
No, bodily autonomy, like up to a point. You can choose whether or not to go to the movies. That's your choice. You can choose whether or not to join the military.
So that's my point, right? You don't agree with the government holding you down, but you do agree with the government excising you from society.
We already accept this. The government does that in a variety of ways already.
Right, so the limit is
we already live in that
Madison
society.
Square Garden, for instance, had a vaccine requirement, and I think Joe Rogan had to refund tickets because he set up the show before the requirement, and it was the government that imposed the requirement on all the businesses. So the vaccine mandate, there's two ways to look at it. I think what they're asking is, ostracizing or excising someone from society is a vaccine mandate, right? Restricting someone's ability
you have
to...
an ability to, you have a choice to do it whether you want to or not. It's whether or not you can have convenience and pleasure in society. And it's obviously a big inconvenience if you don't get to go to see Madison Square Garden, of course. So, but this is a by case basis as well, right?
The government can pressure you to do it. They can take
it's
away
a pressure, for sure.
privileges and access until you do it.
As a matter of public safety, we already allow this. The government does this in a variety of ways for a ton of different things.
I get concerned about that phrase public safety because if they're like, this common cold is very, very contagious. Hey, we have a vaccine ready for it. And I'm like, let's do some long-term studies. Vaccines can be very dangerous if they're not studied properly. So maybe that's another conversation to have. I think it's very important not to let the medical industry govern us. Well, that's why we have a government.
Also, this isn't all axiomatic, right? So you could have the position that under no circumstances would you ever support the government mandating vaccines. You could be of the position that you would be in favor of it, but just not for a disease with the infection and mortality rate that COVID has. There's a lot of different approaches.
So Admar says, this guest looks like the kid of Brendan Fraser and Justin Long.
Did you get that, Brendan Fraser?
Not an insult.
My life. I've been called Brendan Fraser my entire life. It's a running meme.
Tim, I gotta
read this one.
There was a super chat.
I love how they call me a kid, by the way. Hey, just so everyone knows, I'm the oldest person in this room.
No, I'm 44.
Oh, okay, never mind. I take that back.
We're close, dude.
I gotta read it. I gotta read this one. This is important. 1776's Life says, what is a woman?
Would you like me to answer that?
Yeah.
A woman is an adult human female.
Easy enough?
I agree with that.
So trans women are not women?
Oh,
also,
they absolutely are.
And answer that.
They're
What is a woman?
Females.
A woman is hot.
Trans women aren't female, they're male.
No, they're female.
So they have female gametes and whatnot?
Oh, this is actually very interesting. Do you want to talk about gametes? So in embryonic development, when you have two gametes, obviously the sperm and the egg, they combine, right? Usually it's the 23rd chromosome, the XX or the XY, that is going to determine whether or not someone becomes a male or a female. But that's not always the case. There are exceptions to this, known as people with differences of sexual development, DSDs, or intersex people.
It's like
there could be other combinations.
0.017 or something?
It's on a conservative estimate, 0.6% to 2% of the population. There is more intersex people in America than there are redheads. So there's a lot of intersex people, and
that's if you go with the 2%.
That's if you go with the 2%. Seamus is completely right, but I do want to add one really interesting thing about this.
How does that mean a female's a male?
So here's the neatest part. There are individuals who have XY chromosomes, which is normally what is going to be a male, right? You develop it. It's not the only factor, by the way. It's a push and pull with hormones and other stuff like that. But there are people who have XY chromosomes. So if you looked at their bones years into the future and you analyze them, they would be genetically male, but they have a specific condition that suppresses testosterone, which makes them develop 100% like women. We are all templates. We are all templates, and based on hormones, the expression of gender, and different factors, we turn in one direction or the other towards more male or more female.
That certain drugs don't affect men and women the same way?
Exactly, and that's the interesting thing. But we can hijack this entire process if we take hormones. So if we take testosterone or estrogen, we suddenly can have traits that are more feminine or masculine. The redistribution
but it doesn't
of fat, the growth of breasts, the length of hair, all that kind of stuff. So
the socialist wants to redistribute the fat.
so here's what I'm getting to is I think it was in 1993. They passed a law in the United States that required clinical testing to be done on men and women separately because women are affected by drugs differently. And they found that painkillers, for instance, didn't work on women. And so these male doctors were all like, these women are sissies. They can't take the pain. When in reality, it's like the painkillers weren't working.
Yeah, they were being
so, and they also, in these studies, found that, the differences between males and females, you can't change through hormones. For instance, fast twitch muscle fiber, collagen in the skin, prenatal testosterone, the impact, that won't change from later in life taking hormones. So a male's not a female, female's not a male. Sex is bimodal. I think if you ask...
It's genuinely not. Any
it's
scientist...
not bimodal?
Totally is.
We've gone from the left saying that sex is bimodal to not rejecting it, or are you just incorrect?
I think I'm incorrect. Hold on.
Do you know what bimodal means?
I don't know.
It means that intersex people exist and that there's an overlap between the two bell curves.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're totally right. This is... I'll take a big L right there. Sorry.
That means that 97% of females will have statistically average female traits.
Yes, you're correct. The reason I wanted to jump on that, though, is because you're saying that just because you have XY chromosomes, that means by definition you're male. That's not true. I didn't say that. Okay. Do you know about the South African beauty queen, where she is by all there's a documentary on her. By all accounts, if you saw her, you'd be like, this is just a gorgeous, beautiful woman. She has all the parts of a woman. She has breasts. She has, a vagina, all that stuff. But she is intersex, and her chromosomes are XY. So if you looked at her genetics, she's genetically male.
And
this isn't.
But accepting that we want rights for all people, including intersex people, it doesn't change the fact that they make up a relatively small portion of society.
0.6 to 2%.
So can I make a point here?
So a biological male cannot become a biological female.
No one is saying they can. No.
You just did.
No, I didn't. Not whatsoever.
I asked you what a woman was.
Yes, an adult human female.
And I said, is a trans woman a female? You said yes.
I said a trans woman is a woman, and they absolutely are. This is not a gotcha.
But a woman is a female.
Cis women and trans women are different, and trans women do not say that they're cis women. They don't, and that's what makes them trans.
They say they're women.
Yeah, of course, because black women and white women are different, but they're both women.
But trans
a woman is
women,
a
trans woman and a cis woman are different, but
you
they're
said a
both
woman is female.
women. An adult human female.
But a trans woman is male. That's what makes them trans.
They are not male.
So
They're women.
I just want to make a point.
But a woman is female.
They are assigned.
Assigned.
You're assigned your gender at birth. So we're only
gender
one.
is observed.
We're two, right? We're two super chats in.
I feel like a trans woman is a man and a trans man is a woman, and they're both. You're both a trans woman and a man together.
They don't
never
see it that
stop
way.
becoming one. You always are both.
They don't see it that way.
I think the point about like intersex or some people having chromosomes that don't exactly match up with their sex is not the problem is not a problem for what is termed the gender binary by the left. So I think the best way to define sex is based on gametes, the role a person plays in reproduction. And Tim mentioned gametes and not chromosomes. So I would define a female as someone whose reproductive anatomy is ordered towards gestation, and then a male is someone whose reproductive anatomy is ordered towards insemination. The operating phrase there is ordered towards, right? Because someone can have an issue with their reproductive anatomy, but it's still ordered towards something.
And recognizing the bimodal nature of human sex. Meaning that overwhelmingly there's two big trees with a slight overlap in the middle.
Well, even that overlap in the middle, the vast majority of people who are intersex are basically clearly a member of one sex, but with some feature that appears differently. But with one or two features that appear a bit differently.
That's a huge problem. That's a massive problem.
But then,
people who you genuinely can't tell are extremely rare.
I don't like the argument that we should reform society around, very, very small minorities, other than just protect the rights of. So if we're talking about, the issue of biological males going into women's bathrooms or something like that, you have an issue of the civil rights of females versus the civil rights of trans women, and that's where the conflict comes into play.
Yeah, but the conflict there is pretty easy. The majority of people who abuse women in bathrooms is cis men. Let's go after cis men for that.
Well, I think the solution is easy, just single stall bathrooms. Like,
I don't know.
Well,
also, can I ask?
The bathrooms here aren't gendered by I want to say, everyone at home, if you didn't know that, they don't gender the bathrooms here. There's no
they're
signs.
single rooms.
Yeah,
that's just.
That's the way the world should be.
My position has always been single.
You don't have a right to be comfortable. That's not one of your rights. You could deal with it. Life is weird and uncomfortable sometimes.
But the bigger question is, in general, when it comes to the transgender men in sports and women in sports and things like that, is the rights of females versus the rights of trans people, and who gets supplanted.
Right. And so my answer to the bathroom problem would be the majority of women who are abused in bathrooms are abused by cis men. And so that we should be, if we want to protect women and go after abusers, go after cis men who attack women in bathrooms.
But how do you tell the difference between a cis man and a trans woman?
I have to add one more part to that. Trans women are more often the victims of sexual and physical abuse than they are the perpetrators.
But that didn't actually address what I said, right? It's like females and trans women, who gets supplanted? If females say we want a space free from males, period, then should they have their rights protected in having a safe space, or should trans women say, no, we actually get access to this space?
Do trans men take away from your experience? Do they supplant you as a man?
Me personally, I don't care. Right?
Me too. In fact, trans men make my experience way more interesting.
But you haven't answered the question.
Because you're saying supplanting their experience, right? You're taking away from women.
There are women right now,
yes,
who are saying, they're biological females saying, we do not want biological males in our space.
Mm-hmm. So should Blair White be allowed to go in that bathroom?
I think Blair White should go in the bathroom where Blair White appears to fit in most.
So why does she get a pass? Because she's very passing? Is that why?
I'm not talking about, my view is Buck Angel should go in the men's room and Blair White should go in the women's room.
But they disagree with that. She's technically a biological male.
I think Blair White agrees with what I just said.
Yes, but you're taking my position. And good for you. That's woke as fuck. Hell yeah. That's based. We made
That's why,
progress.
I don't know if you watch the show. It's not progress. I've always had that opinion.
It's based as fuck. Hell yeah.
But I've always had that opinion. So even Cassandra Fairbanks, the
so
editor-in-chief
trans
of
women
this
can go
company.
into women's bathrooms. Awesome.
Right.
Awesome.
I don't know.
We agree.
Yeah. So my
We agree.
issue is,
hell yeah.
Seamus doesn't agree with that.
Yeah.
And Buck Angel's biologically female, but
You
Buck
think,
Angel,
you think Blair White should have to go into a man's bathroom?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that just
Why?
causes more
Yeah,
problems.
because well, I don't want to say anything that's going to get Tim's YouTube channel taken down.
Let's go to the
here.
members only show, and Seamus can then say all of his nasty Catholic things.
Well, yeah.
All right, everybody. Here's what's going to happen. I'm sorry we didn't get to the super chats. I genuinely apologize. This is what happens. We go off, right? We're going to go to the members only chat. We're going to do audience questions. Smash the like button if you'd like, and head over to timcast.com. Become a member. We're going to do the members only so that Seamus can say naughty words or whatever.
Yeah.
But before we go,
That's what they call the
You can
truth
follow
now.
the show at TimCast IRL on Instagram. You can follow me personally at TimCast. Lance, do you want to shout anything out?
Thank you so much for watching me and listening to my radical leftist Marxist agenda. If you want to see me anywhere else on the internet, go to everywhere social media is sold at the Serfs TV. That's at the Serfs TV. And also shout out to the leftist mafia who's watching this right now. Love all of you.
My name is Seamus Coughlin. What I'm shouting out is the St. Joseph Novena that I'm praying right now. We're on day 4. You can find that on my Twitter. I pinned it. We're praying for the working class in this country in this time of deep economic turmoil, for the unborn, and for our enemies, people we disliked, people who got fired from Vice, Dylan Mulvaney, and that our country will return to God.
And I am Ian Crossland. I agree with you. The country will return to God. I think it is very important that we, although we will focus on the things we are saying, focus very much on the way we are saying them and find a way to communicate with people that we may disagree with. That's the root of empathy and communication and the unification of humanity moving forward. Thank you very much for coming, Lance. That was really awesome. And Tim, you're a badass. So are you, Seamus.
Not Serge, though.
No, Serge is,
No,
Serge
Serge is
is
cool.
it's like a wavelength.
That was quite intense.
Well, we still got more. We're going to do this members only uncensored thing where Seamus is going to go Super Saiyan.
Yeah.
Why are you putting this all on me?
'Cause you're the
Isn't
Catholic.
everyone going Super Saiyan? I didn't
'Cause I
get
just
a word
agree
in
with-
edgewise
I
on
just-
air.
I just
Now
agree
you're
with him
telling
in
me
the
about the
bathroom.
Energy's
paywall I got to
just
perform
charging
for
up.
you?
All right, Serge.
I'm Serge.com on Twitter. This is going to be interesting. Let's go.
And the last thing I'll say is, for those they're just they aren't going to be at the members show. Lance, this is one of the best episodes I think we've ever done.
Yes, that was good.
I really do think these are the best conversations because we obviously clash and view the world differently, but this is where the conversation it needs to happen for anyone's views to evolve or to at least understand what the other person thinks.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Juste, we shall spend many a generations building mighty cathedrals in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your oafish jesters, here to offer you a laugh at any opportunity. To our brave knights of the Round Table, Rachel K., Izzy Solidarity, Victoria Bell, Sebastian Demel, Mark Harmon, Benji Arney, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood, Everything Important, Hegbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Doug Cady, Daniel Sutton, Jenna Tao, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevbot EXE, Brian Ephraim, Anthropophojack, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Ralph Parler, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We salute our valiant heroes off to fight injustice everywhere.